This is a quiet place in the world where land meets peace. The places we explore here are meant to calm your mind and make you curious. Tonight, we're going on a journey to see something you can't find on any map at first, but it shapes our lives every single day. We are exploring the invisible world of time itself, those strange, invisible lines that decide when one place sees the sunrise while another place is already saying goodnight. Before we go further, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Geography is about connections just as much as places, and it's always amazing to see how far these gentle journeys can reach. If you want to share, leave a note in the comments. And if you enjoy this quiet exploration, a like and subscribe helps keep this channel growing. Thank you so much to those of you who have already joined this little community. I hope this story soothes you. Though there's a small puzzle, I must admit. I hope this video isn't so interesting that it keeps you awake. But if your eyes stay open a little longer, at least you might fall asleep having learned something quietly wonderful. So let's begin with one simple question to carry us forward. What does it really mean to stand in one place but be living in a completely different hour than someone just across an invisible line? Time is one of those things so familiar that we often don't notice it. You look at the sky and see daylight fading or stars returning, and it feels as natural as breathing. But underneath that simple feeling lies a world of careful divisions, hundreds of years of human struggle, and more than a little compromise. Geography in this way isn't only mountains and rivers, it's also the invisible lines that tell us when to wake up, when to work, and when to rest. At its heart, the geography of time begins with the Earth itself, a round ball spinning steadily in space, tilted just so, bringing light and darkness across its surface in a never-ending cycle. That rhythm is ancient, older than humans, but it was humans who chose to carve it into hours and minutes, putting order on something that never asked for it. From sundials in ancient fields to the exact ticking of atomic clocks, we have been measuring, making standard, and sometimes arguing over what the very idea of now should mean. But time is never just science. It's also history written in train schedules and ship charts. It's politics when countries decide to line up with one side of a line rather than another. It's culture in the different ways people choose to treat the passing of hours. Some are strictly on time, others flow with a rhythm more like ocean waves than the ticking of a clock. And of course, it's deeply personal. Anyone who has crossed an ocean only to find their body refusing to agree with the local sunrise knows that time zones are more than lines on a map. They're a close part of human experience. This story will take us from the Earth's slow turn beneath the sky to the strange oddities of borders where today and tomorrow meet. It will follow the rise of empires that stretched their hours across oceans and the scientists who gave us a common standard. Along the way, we will find oddities like half-hour zones, debates over daylight saving, and the curious fact that on the edges of the planet, humans sometimes invent their own sense of time because nature offers no clues at all. So, as you settle in, let your mind drift across the hours. Time zones are far more than a matter of convenience. They are a reminder that while the Earth spins in silence, people everywhere are constantly deciding how best to keep pace with it. And perhaps by the end, you may see the clock on your wall, not just as a set of numbers, but as a tiny reflection of the planet's grand and gentle rotation. If you step outside on a clear night and tilt your head back, you're not just looking at the stars. You are in a very quiet way experiencing the motion of the entire planet. The Earth is turning steadily beneath your feet, rolling through the darkness like a ship gliding across an endless sea. It is this rotation, slow but unstoppable, that creates the daily rhythm of daylight and darkness, a cycle so ancient and reliable that all of life has learned to dance to its beat. The Earth completes one full spin on its axis in just under 24 hours. More exactly, it takes 23 hours, 56 minutes, and 4 seconds to rotate once compared to the stars. This measurement is called a sidereal day, and it's ever so slightly shorter than the solar day we're used to, which is the time between one noon and the next. That difference exists because the Earth is not only spinning, but also moving around the sun. Each day, the planet travels a little farther along its path around the sun, so it must rotate just a touch more to bring the sun back to the same place in the sky. The result is the familiar 24-hour cycle we live by, a compromise between cosmic precision and human convenience. This steady spin sets the stage for one of the simplest, yet most amazing experiences we know: sunrise and sunset. To the east, the horizon begins to glow, colors shifting from deep, dark blue to pink and gold, as the Earth's turning lifts your part of the world back into the path of sunlight. Hours later, the same motion carries the sun down toward the west, making shadows longer and cooling the air. It's easy to forget that what feels like the sun rising and setting is really the planet itself rotating. Your feet are sweeping you along at hundreds of meters per second without you even noticing. The axis of the Earth is not straight up, but tilted at about 23.5 degrees. That lean is responsible for the changing seasons and for the different lengths of day and night throughout the year. Near the equator, day and night are almost equal all year long. Near the poles, the tilt stretches the pattern into extremes of long summer days and endless winter nights. Without this tilt, the rhythm of the planet would be simpler but far less varied, and much of the rich variety of climates and ecosystems would disappear. Geography, in this sense, is written not only on the surface of the Earth, but also in the way it turns. Every location experiences the spin a little differently. Imagine two people, one in Paris and another in New York. When one is sipping morning coffee under bright daylight, the other may be yawning in the evening glow. This difference happens because the sun's light can only shine on half of the globe at a time. As the Earth rotates, each city takes its turn beneath the sun's gaze. Noon in one place is midnight in another. What's striking is that these differences aren't random but orderly, a direct result of the round shape of the Earth and its never-stopping rotation. For early humans, this natural cycle was the first clock. Before the invention of gears and pendulums, the movement of the sun and the phases of the moon were the only guides to marking the passage of time. The length of a shadow at midday, the brightening of the horizon at dawn, the return of familiar star patterns in the night sky, all were signals that life could be arranged around. Farming, hunting, and even storytelling around a fire were tied to this rhythm. Timekeeping wasn't forced from above. It was felt through the turning of the Earth. Though the cycle is remarkably steady, it's not perfectly unchanging. Over vast stretches of time, the rotation of the Earth is gradually slowing down. Tidal forces, the gravitational pull between Earth and Moon, act like a cosmic brake, stealing tiny fractions of a second from the length of each day. Hundreds of millions of years ago, a day was closer to 22 hours long, and the Moon was noticeably closer to Earth. In millions of years to come, days will stretch slightly longer still. It's a reminder that even the most reliable patterns of nature carry a touch of change within them. From a personal view, the Earth's rotation is invisible, yet deeply felt. Jet lag, for instance, isn't only a matter of crossing time zones, but also of the body's internal rhythms being disrupted by the relentless spin of the planet beneath. Our circadian clock, the roughly 24-hour cycle built into our biology, is tuned to the daily change of light and dark. When that natural cue is thrown off, whether by artificial lighting, late nights, or travel across continents, the body resists, craving alignment with the Earth's steady turn. We are, in a very real sense, creatures bound to the rotation of our world. It's worth pausing to marvel at the sheer scale of the motion. At the equator, the Earth's surface races along at over 1,600 kilometers per hour compared to the planet's center. Closer to the poles, the speed is less as the circles of rotation shrink, but the feeling is the same: constant, smooth movement. Because it's so uniform, we don't feel it. Gravity anchors us firmly, and the rotation is as unnoticeable as drifting on a perfectly still boat in a calm sea. Yet without it, there would be no dawn, no dusk, and perhaps no life as we know it. The turning Earth is more than a backdrop to our days. It's the foundation upon which all our measurements of time are built. The invention of hours, minutes, and seconds is a human improvement. But the basic pattern comes from the change of light and dark. Every watch, every clock tower, and every calendar ultimately reflects the simple fact that the Earth is spinning beneath the sun. When you glance at the time, you're really checking your position in the great cycle of the planet's rotation. This connection between cosmic motion and human routine is part of what makes the geography of time so compelling. A student hurrying to school, a farmer rising with the first rays, a traveler watching the stars through an airplane window, all are linked by the same turning of the Earth. We may live in different places, speak different languages, and follow different customs, but we all share the same rotating home. It's one of the few truths that unites everyone, a constant rhythm that has pulsed through every generation that has ever lived. The story of time begins here, with the rotation of our planet. It's a simple movement, steady and ancient, yet endlessly rich in meaning. Every sunrise is the Earth itself, carrying us forward into the light, and every sunset is the reminder that we are passengers on a spinning sphere, traveling together through space. The next time you see the horizon brighten, consider for a moment that it's not the sun moving, but you, gently, steadily, as the Earth continues its eternal turn. Long before the ticking of gears or the soft glow of digital screens, humans looked upward to the sky to make sense of passing hours. The heavens offered a vast clock face that never failed to turn, and people everywhere learned to read it with a mixture of awe, practicality, and cleverness. The first timekeepers weren't built of metal and glass, but of shadows, water, fire, and sand. Each one was a humble attempt to harness the rhythm of nature and give it shape in human life. One of the earliest and simplest inventions was the sundial. Place a stick or pillar upright in the ground, and its shadow will sweep in a graceful arc as the sun moves overhead. By carving notches or lines where the shadow fell, people could divide the day into sections. Ancient Egyptians were already using shadow clocks more than 3,000 years ago, splitting daylight into smaller and smaller slices. The Greeks later refined the sundial into elaborate stone structures, some accurate enough to mark the change of seasons. In truth, the sundial was both science and art, its steady shadow tracing the Earth's turn, while its design reflected the culture that built it. But shadows have their limits. Clouds erase them, and nightfall makes them useless. For those seeking to measure hours beyond daylight, other solutions emerged. The water clock, or clepsydra, was among the most versatile. A simple vessel with a small hole at the bottom allowed water to drip at a steady rate. By figuring out how much time it took to fill or empty the container, people could track the passage of hours regardless of sunshine. Egyptians used water clocks to time temple rituals, while the Greeks used them to keep order in their courts, making sure speeches didn't stretch endlessly. In China, these devices grew ever more complex, with elaborate mechanisms controlling the flow of water through bronze vessels decorated with dragons and mythical creatures. Sand, too, became a trusted partner in measuring time. The hourglass, with its narrow waist of glass allowing grains to slip at a controlled pace, appeared in Europe by the early Middle Ages. Simple to use, portable, and unaffected by temperature, the hourglass became popular with sailors who needed a reliable way to measure watches at sea. A steady stream of falling sand gave a touchable sense of passing minutes, an elegant symbol of time itself slipping away. To this day, the hourglass remains a lasting symbol, its flowing grains a reminder of time's ceaseless movement. Looking skyward, ancient civilizations also turned to the stars. The Babylonians, masters of celestial observation, divided the day into 24 hours, borrowing their base 60 number system to split time into convenient divisions. The Mayans tracked the heavens with extraordinary precision, weaving astronomy into their calendars and rituals. In India, astronomers mapped the rising and setting of star patterns to time-farming activities. These weren't simply scientific pursuits, but deeply cultural ones. The night sky was a cosmic guide, a spiritual teacher, and a calendar all at once. Yet even with such cleverness, the way humans divided the day varied widely. The Egyptians favored dividing daylight into 12 parts, which meant that an hour stretched longer in summer and shorter in winter. In contrast, the Babylonians and Greeks worked toward hours of equal length, a step closer to the uniform time we know today. In medieval Islamic culture, prayer times were tied to the position of the sun, encouraging a flexible understanding of daily rhythm. The Chinese developed systems that split the day into 100 ki, each representing a little over 14 minutes, a reminder that the carving of time can be as cultural as it is scientific. This variety shows that timekeeping was never only about precision. It was about aligning human activity with the rhythms of nature and community. Farmers needed to know when to plant. Priests needed to know when to perform rituals, and rulers needed to know when to gather councils. The divisions of the day reflected the priorities of society. An hour could mean different things in different places, and yet each system worked perfectly well for the people who used it. The gradual move toward mechanical measurement marked a turning point. In Europe, during the Middle Ages, the invention of weight-driven clocks began to change the way time was experienced. Tower clocks rang bells to call townspeople to work and worship, their chimes slicing the day into more rigid segments. No longer dependent on sunlight or the slow drip of water, people began to live by the striking of hours. This shift was subtle at first, but profound in its consequences. Hours became equal in length, and time itself began to feel like a resource that could be counted, saved, or wasted. Mechanical clocks spread across Europe in the 14th and 15th centuries, each new design refining accuracy and reliability. Pendulum clocks, perfected in the 17th century by Christian Huygens, brought precision to an entirely new level, losing only seconds per day compared to the vaguer drift of earlier devices. For the first time, humans could measure time with a regularity that rivaled the motion of the heavens themselves. Yet despite this march toward ever finer measurement, the bond between time and the sky never truly disappeared. Astronomical clocks built in cities like Prague and Strasbourg displayed not only the hours but also the positions of the sun, moon, and stars as though to remind viewers that mechanical precision still rested upon celestial rhythms. Even as gears and springs ticked away, the heavens remained the ultimate reference. The story of early timekeeping is one of gradual transition, from observing nature to imitating it, and then finally, to creating systems that operated almost independently of the sky. Each step was both practical and symbolic. Sundials tethered humans to the shadow of the sun. Water clocks carried time into the darkness of night. Hourglasses made time portable, a companion that could travel across seas. And mechanical clocks turned time into a universal language of bells and ticks, a pattern that could be imposed on entire towns and cities. It's easy now to glance at a watch or a phone and forget how extraordinary this journey has been. The idea that minutes are equal and hours unchanging is a relatively recent invention, the product of centuries of human effort. Earlier generations lived with a more fluid, less rigid sense of time, one that bent to the seasons and the sky. In many ways, their experience was closer to nature's own rhythm, even if it lacked the precision we now take for granted. So when you see the sweep of a clock hand or hear the quiet buzz of a digital alarm, you're encountering the culmination of a very long history. It began with the play of light and shadow on stone, with water dripping from clay pots, and with sand slipping steadily through narrow glass. Each invention was a step in humanity's quest to understand and control time, but also a reflection of how deeply we have always looked to the heavens for guidance. The march from sundials to pendulums wasn't just a technical story, it was a cultural one, filled with creativity, faith, and the desire to bring order to life. Every clock is, in its own way, a miniature cosmos, capturing the grand cycles of day and night in a form small enough to rest on a wall or wrist. And it all began when humans first lifted their eyes to the sky, saw the sun's shadow stretch and shrink, and realized that the passing hours could be measured, remembered, and shared. For much of human history, the greatest challenge in sailing across the oceans wasn't the storms, nor the pirates, nor even the scurvy. It was figuring out exactly where in the world you were. More specifically, sailors could often tell how far north or south they had traveled, but they struggled desperately with the question of how far east or west they had drifted. This was the problem of longitude, and it haunted navigators for centuries. Latitude, the measure of north and south, was relatively straightforward. With a sextant, or even with nothing more than a sharp eye and knowledge of the heavens, a sailor could gauge the height of the sun at noon or the position of familiar stars like Polaris, the North Star. Latitude offered a dependable guide, and maps could be drawn with some confidence. Longitude, however, was another matter entirely. The Earth spins, and there are no natural markers that reveal how far you've traveled eastward or westward. One stretch of open sea looks much like another, and without a reliable way of measuring, a ship could drift hundreds of kilometers off course without anyone realizing it until it was far too late. The key to longitude lay in time. Because the Earth rotates 360 degrees in roughly 24 hours, every hour's difference corresponds to 15 degrees of longitude. If a sailor knew the exact time at a fixed reference point, such as Greenwich, and compared it with the local time on board, measured by observing the sun's highest point in the sky, the difference would reveal how far east or west the ship had traveled. The principle was simple enough, but the practice was devilishly difficult. The obstacle was the clock. At sea, no ordinary timepiece could be trusted. Pendulum clocks, accurate on land, were useless aboard ships that pitched and rolled with the waves. Temperature changes warped materials, humidity corroded delicate mechanisms, and the endless motion made precise measurement nearly impossible. An error of just a few minutes in keeping time could mean hundreds of kilometers of navigational mistake. It was a problem with life or death consequences, as wrecked ships and lost sailors tragically demonstrated. The search for a solution became one of the great scientific quests of the 17th and 18th centuries. Monarchs and parliaments offered vast rewards to anyone who could conquer the longitude problem. In Britain, the Longitude Act of 1714 promised a prize of up to $20,000, a fortune, for a method accurate enough to guide ships safely across the world's oceans. Some suggested astronomical methods, such as using the predictable motions of Jupiter's moons as a celestial clock. Others tried elaborate charts of the moon's position against the stars, an approach called the lunar distance method. While ingenious, these methods required painstaking observations and complex calculations, hardly ideal on a storm-tossed deck. Into this world of difficulty stepped John Harrison, a carpenter from Yorkshire with little formal education, but an extraordinary gift for mechanics. He dedicated his life to building a clock that could keep precise time at sea. His early designs, known as H1 through H3, were bold experiments with swinging balances and intricate gears meant to resist the rocking of the ship. They were promising, but imperfect. Undeterred, Harrison refined his designs over decades, creating the H4, a device that looked less like a clock and more like a large pocket watch. Unlike its predecessors, the H4 proved astonishingly accurate, keeping time within a matter of seconds during long voyages. This breakthrough transformed navigation. With Harrison's chronometer, sailors could finally carry Greenwich time with them, comparing it to local noon to determine longitude with a degree of accuracy that had once seemed impossible. Though Harrison himself endured years of skepticism, delays, and political wrangling before receiving proper recognition and reward, his work opened the way for a new era of safe and reliable ocean travel. The chronometer became as essential to global exploration as the compass or the sextant. By the late 18th and 19th centuries, ships routinely carried multiple chronometers, checking them against one another to ensure accuracy. The British Royal Navy adopted them enthusiastically, and Britain's influence in world trade and empire was partly reinforced by this mastery of longitude. To sail with confidence across the Atlantic or into the vast Pacific was no longer a gamble, but a matter of careful calculation. The oceans, once mysterious and perilous, grew just a little smaller. The problem of longitude did more than make sailing safer. It laid the groundwork for standardized time itself. To calculate longitude, you needed a reference point, and Greenwich Observatory became that anchor. Greenwich Mean Time emerged as the baseline against which longitude was measured, and eventually it became the world's central reference for hours and minutes. What began as a solution for sailors rippled out into a system that touched every clock and calendar. Without the push to solve longitude, the notion of dividing the world into shared time zones might have come much later, or in a very different form. The story also illustrates how geography and science entwine. Longitude is a purely geographic concept measuring distance around the globe's east-west axis. Yet it could not be unlocked without human ingenuity, patience, and craftsmanship. Harrison's chronometers, polished by hand and tuned with exquisite care, bridged the gap between the stars above and the rolling seas below. They showed that to master geography, one must often first master time. Today, with satellites orbiting overhead and GPS signals streaming into handheld devices, the difficulty of longitude seems almost quaint. A smartphone can tell you your exact position to within a few meters anywhere on Earth. But beneath that ease lies the legacy of centuries of struggle, of shipwrecks avoided, and voyages completed because someone finally found a way to carry time across the sea. It's worth imagining the relief of a captain glancing at his chronometer, comparing it with the sun, and realizing that his ship was on course, landfall expected just where the charts promised. In that moment, time wasn't an abstract concept ticking away in the background. It was the very key to survival, a compass of hours that unlocked the geography of the world. The problem of longitude was, at its core, a problem of synchrony, how to align the turning of the Earth with the ticking of a human-made device. Solving it reshaped navigation, trade, and ultimately the very way the world agreed on what time it was. Out of the frustration of countless sailors lost in the fog of uncertainty came a triumph of precision, a story where geography and time fused into one. In the early 19th century, time was a local affair. Each town or city kept its own version of the hours, usually based on the position of the sun. When the church bell rang noon, it was because the sun stood directly overhead in that particular place. Travel a few kilometers down the road, however, and noon might arrive several minutes earlier or later. Nobody minded much. Farmers rose with the dawn. Shopkeepers opened when customers appeared, and life moved at a pace dictated by nature rather than a standardized schedule. Local clocks were community anchors, not parts of a global network. This system worked well enough until something came hurtling down the tracks that refused to tolerate such charming chaos. The railway. The steam locomotive, with its hunger for precision and its indifference to quaint local customs, exposed just how fractured time really was. Trains ran on timetables, and timetables demanded consistency. When a journey from one city to another could be completed in a few hours, the small differences between local times became a serious problem. What had once been an amusing quirk of geography now risked confusion, missed connections, and even catastrophic collisions. Imagine trying to organize a railway network when every station set its clocks according to its own interpretation of solar time. A train leaving Bristol at what it considered to be noon might arrive in London at 1 local time, though only 50 minutes had actually passed. Passengers trying to plan journeys were left scratching their heads, unsure whether to trust the timetable, the station clock, or their own pocket watches. For railway companies, this was more than inconvenient. It was dangerous. A misunderstanding of just a few minutes could mean 2 trains ending up on the same stretch of track at the same time, with disastrous results. The growing railway empires of the 19th century forced society to confront the need for synchronization. Britain, with its rapidly expanding network of iron rails, led the way. The Great Western Railway, championed by the engineer Isambard Kingdom Brunel, began using London time, or Greenwich Mean Time, across its routes in the 1840s. Other companies followed suit. Soon, railway timetables across the country were all set to Greenwich, even if local town hall clocks still clung stubbornly to solar noon. People joked about railway time versus church time, but gradually railway time won. By the mid-1850s, most public clocks in Britain had adjusted to Greenwich, and in 1880 it became the official legal time of the land. Across the Atlantic, the problem was magnified by sheer scale. The United States had hundreds of local times, each city deciding for itself when noon occurred. As trains began spanning vast distances, the confusion multiplied. By the 1870s, railroad companies alone were keeping over 70 different time standards, each with its own rules. Passengers might carry elaborate conversion tables to keep track of it all. In some towns, railway stations even had 2 clocks, one showing local time, the other showing railway time. It was an elegant solution in appearance, but hardly practical. The tipping point came in 1883 when American and Canadian railroads collectively agreed to adopt a system of standardized time zones. The continent was divided into 4 main zones, each 1 hour apart. On November 18th of that year, known afterward as the Day of Two Noons, clocks across the railways were reset to match the new divisions. In some towns, this meant that the local time was suddenly fast-forwarded or set back by half an hour or more. People were bewildered. But the efficiency was undeniable. Trains ran more safely, timetables became reliable, and the seeds of a coordinated time system had been firmly planted. Railways weren't just about moving people and goods, they were about moving time itself. The iron rails stitched together landscapes that had once been separate worlds of their own, and in doing so they demanded order. Without synchronization, the very promise of rail travel, speed, regularity, and safety, could not be fulfilled. Industrialization was pushing humanity into a new age, one where the hours were no longer tied purely to the sun, but also to the schedules of machines. The cultural impact was enormous. For the first time, people had to adjust their lives to an external standard rather than their local rhythms. Noon was no longer when the sun was highest over the town square, but when a national or international authority said it was. Some resisted fiercely, seeing standardized time as an intrusion, a cold imposition of industrial order onto the organic flow of daily life. But the practical benefits were undeniable, and resistance gradually gave way to acceptance. The synchronization of time also reshaped daily habits. Factory workers, bound to the whistle and the clock, lived by regimented hours that bore little resemblance to the old solar day. School children marched into classrooms at precisely timed intervals, and businesses opened and closed according to schedules that could be coordinated across entire regions. The railway had not only changed how people traveled, but also how they conceived of time itself. Hours became more rigid, more universal, more inescapably mechanical. In cities like London, Paris, and New York, enormous public clocks became symbols of modernity and progress. They weren't simply for decoration, but served as visible reminders that the city moved to a collective rhythm. To be on time meant to be synchronized with everyone else, a discipline that both liberated and constrained. Trains demanded punctuality, and punctuality demanded that individuals surrender their personal sense of time to a greater order. Looking back, it's striking how quickly this transformation occurred once the railways made it necessary. For centuries, people had been content with a patchwork of local times, each community marching to its own beat. Within a matter of decades, the arrival of locomotives forced a new level of coordination, pulling society toward a global system. Industrialization had made time itself a commodity, one that had to be measured, divided, and delivered with precision. The iron horse did more than carry passengers and freight. It carried a new philosophy of time across the landscape, replacing the age-old reliance on the sun with the ticking of standardized clocks. Every departure and arrival was proof that hours and minutes had become tools of organization, no longer just natural markers of dawn and dusk. The railway demanded obedience to its schedules, and in doing so, it brought humanity closer to the modern world of synchronized time zones. What began as a solution to prevent trains from colliding became one of the defining shifts of the 19th century, the taming of time itself. From that point forward, hours could no longer be purely local. They were coordinated, enforced, and shared across entire nations. The world was still divided by geography, but increasingly it was united by the clock. In the age of steam and steel, the rhythm of life ticked not only with the sun above, but with the chimes of station clocks, ensuring that civilization moved forward in lockstep with the rails. If you were to stroll through a quiet park in southeast London, you might come across a modest line running across the ground at the Royal Observatory in Greenwich. It's a line unlike any other, for it doesn't mark a river or a road, but something far more abstract: the prime meridian, the line of zero longitude, the place from which all the world's eastings and westings are measured. To stand with one foot on either side is to place yourself, symbolically at least, in two hemispheres at once. But why here in Greenwich, of all places? And how did a line scratched across a London hillside come to anchor the world's clocks? The story begins in the 17th century, when England, like many seafaring nations, was desperate to solve the problem of navigation. Ships needed better charts, and better charts required more accurate measurements of the heavens. In 1675, King Charles II founded the Royal Observatory at Greenwich with the specific goal of improving navigation and mapping the skies. Its first astronomer royal, John Flamsteed, set about the painstaking task of cataloging the stars with remarkable precision, work that would serve sailors navigating the oceans for generations. The observatory soon became a hub of astronomical and navigational science, with telescopes trained on the night sky and instruments measuring the transit of celestial bodies across the local meridian. Greenwich developed a reputation for reliability. In an age when the seas were the highways of empire, the ability to chart longitude accurately meant the difference between safe passage and disaster. The observatory's charts and tables were in high demand, not only in Britain but across the globe. The Greenwich Meridian, initially a local reference, began to gain prestige simply because it was practical. As the 18th and 19th centuries unfolded, Britain's global influence expanded dramatically. Its ships circled the globe, its traders reached every corner, and its naval power dominated the seas. Wherever British sailors went, they carried charts and tables referencing the Greenwich Meridian. Over time, Greenwich became not just a national standard, but a de facto international one, reinforced by the weight of commerce and empire. Yet the choice of Greenwich wasn't inevitable. Other nations had their own observatories and meridians they preferred. France, for instance, championed the Paris Meridian, running through the Paris Observatory. Spain used Madrid, while some American cartographers aligned maps with Washington. The competition wasn't purely scientific, but also political, each nation eager to see its capital serve as the anchor of global geography. For a long time, there was no universal agreement, and maps could vary depending on whose chart you consulted. By the late 19th century, however, the need for a single global standard had become undeniable. Railways, telegraphs, and international trade demanded uniformity. The United States, with its sprawling territory and rapidly growing infrastructure, pressed strongly for a universal meridian. The matter came to a head in 1884 at the International Meridian Conference in Washington, D.C. Representatives from 25 countries gathered to settle the issue once and for all. Where should zero longitude be placed? The debates were lively and at times heated. France naturally favored Paris, while Britain argued firmly for Greenwich. The deciding factor wasn't patriotism, but practicality. By then, more than two-thirds of the world's shipping already relied on Greenwich-based charts. The sheer momentum of usage was overwhelming. On October 13, 1884, the delegates voted Greenwich would become the prime meridian of the world. 22 nations agreed, with only San Domingo voting against and France and Brazil abstaining. France, reluctant to surrender entirely, continued to use the Paris meridian domestically for decades afterward. Even into the 20th century, some French maps carried dual meridians, a small but telling sign of national pride. But in the grand sweep of time, Greenwich emerged as the global standard, the 0 point from which longitude is measured eastward and westward, circling the Earth in both directions until it meets again at 180 degrees in the Pacific. The Greenwich line also became the backbone of time itself. Because longitude and time are linked, with every 15 degrees representing 1 hour, the prime meridian naturally became the anchor for a global clock system. Greenwich Mean Time, or GMT, was established as the reference, marking noon at Greenwich as the baseline against which all other times were compared. Telegraph lines carried GMT across Britain, then across continents, and eventually under the oceans. For the first time in history, people in distant lands could synchronize their watches to a common standard, uniting humanity in a shared temporal framework. Standing on the meridian at Greenwich, you're reminded that geography isn't only about mountains and rivers, but also about the invisible lines humans draw to make sense of the world. The prime meridian isn't etched into the crust of the Earth. It's a decision, a convention, a product of history and politics. Yet it has power. Airlines schedule flights by it, sailors plot courses by it, and scientists coordinate experiments by it. That a single line drawn through a London park could wield such influence is one of the quiet marvels of modern geography. The Greenwich Observatory itself has become a symbol of this legacy. Its red brick buildings, perched on a hill in Greenwich Park, house not only telescopes and instruments, but also the spirit of centuries of inquiry. Tourists flock to stand astride the meridian, snapping photographs with 1 foot in the eastern hemisphere and 1 in the western. Few may ponder the long story behind that line, but all feel its quiet significance. It's a reminder that geography, like time, is shaped as much by human decisions as by natural forces. In the 20th century, GMT gave way to Coordinated Universal Time, or UTC, based on atomic clocks rather than the rotation of the Earth. Yet the link to Greenwich remained strong, both in name and in spirit. The world still looks to that hillside in London as the point of reference, a testament to the enduring influence of a choice made more than a century ago. The Greenwich line is, in the end, a triumph of practicality over pride, of consensus over division. It illustrates how humanity, when faced with the demands of a shrinking world, can come together to draw a line that everyone agrees to follow. 0 longitude could have been anywhere, but it became Greenwich. And in that decision, the world found a center around which its clocks could turn. So next time you glance at your watch or check the time on your phone, remember that you're in a way connected to that quiet line in London. It's an invisible thread binding together every hour, every schedule, every moment shared across the globe. The Greenwich line isn't just a stroke on a map. It's the axis of modern time, a line that transformed the way the world thinks, travels, and connects. Once the world had agreed on a prime meridian at Greenwich, the next question was how to slice the globe into manageable pieces of time. The Earth spins 360 degrees in about 24 hours, which meant that dividing it into 24 time zones of 15 degrees each was the logical solution. On paper, the idea was clean and elegant. In practice, the map of time turned out to be anything but tidy. The Canadian engineer Sir Sandford Fleming is often credited with proposing the modern time zone system in the late 19th century. Frustrated by missed trains and chaotic scheduling, he envisioned the Earth divided into 24 neat wedges, each exactly 1 hour apart, measured from the Greenwich meridian. Fleming's idea was ambitious but persuasive, offering a framework that promised order for a world increasingly tied together by railways, telegraphs, and international trade. It was a vision of time cut into crisp slices, ready to be served to a globalizing planet. At first glance, the system appears simple. Each zone spans 15 degrees of longitude, moving steadily east and west from Greenwich. As you travel eastward, clocks are set 1 hour ahead for each zone, and as you travel westward, 1 hour behind. Follow the logic all the way around the globe, and you complete a full cycle of 24 hours. But the Earth isn't made of neat geometric wedges. It's made of mountains and rivers, countries and borders, islands and coastlines. When the theory of time zones collided with the messy geography of human life, the map became a patchwork of oddities. Take a look at the International Time Zone map, and you'll see lines zigzagging in curious ways. Rather than running in perfect vertical strips, they bend and curve to accommodate political boundaries and population centers. No government wanted its territory sliced into 2 zones if it could be avoided, so the lines often bulge outward to keep whole nations under 1 clock. In China, for instance, the vast sweep of land stretching across nearly 5 time zones observes only one, Beijing time. This decision was driven by politics, ensuring that the entire country ticks to a single rhythm, even if it means the sun rises absurdly late in the far western provinces. India chose a similar path, setting its time at 5.5 hours ahead of Greenwich. That half-hour compromise allowed the country to avoid aligning itself too closely with either neighboring Pakistan or Bangladesh. Nepal went even further in asserting independence, declaring its official time to be 5 hours and 45 minutes ahead of Greenwich. That unusual 15-minute difference is less about convenience than about identity, a statement that even in something as abstract as time, a nation can stand apart. Elsewhere, geography forced peculiar shapes onto the zones. Islands in the Pacific had to choose whether to align with Asia or the Americas, often bending the international date line to suit their needs. In Europe, the time zones squeeze and stretch like an accordion as nations attempt to balance longitude with cultural and economic ties. Spain, for instance, lies geographically in the same zone as Britain, but observes Central European time, a legacy of political decisions made during the Second World War. As a result, Spaniards eat dinner and stay up later than most of their neighbors, their daily rhythm shifted by an official choice of time. Despite these quirks, the core system of 24 hours circling the globe gradually took root. Railways adopted it first, followed by shipping companies, then governments. The efficiency it offered was irresistible. Travelers could now plan journeys with confidence, businesses could schedule communication across continents, and scientists could record observations without ambiguity. The sun still rose and set at its usual pace, but human activity was now framed by a global system of hours that connected distant corners of the Earth. The transition wasn't instantaneous. Some regions resisted, clinging to local time out of habit or pride. Others experimented with variations, adding half-hour or quarter-hour offsets that suited their circumstances. But over the course of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the time zone system spread steadily. The telegraph and the radio played crucial roles, broadcasting time signals that allowed communities to synchronize with accuracy previously unimaginable. A farmer in rural America could set his watch by a signal transmitted from Washington, while a ship in the middle of the Atlantic could tune into Greenwich. The adoption of time zones also brought a subtle but profound shift in human perception. For millennia, time had been local, tied to the sun overhead and the rhythms of the seasons. Now, for the first time, time became standardized, abstracted from the natural world. Noon no longer necessarily meant the sun was at its highest point. Instead, it meant that society had agreed it was noon according to the map. Time had become a collective decision, not merely a natural event. This shift sometimes produced amusing consequences. A traveler might leave one town in the morning and arrive in another only a short train ride away, where the clock showed an entirely different hour. Border towns found themselves split between zones, with residents living in a kind of temporal limbo. Businesses on either side had to carefully coordinate to avoid confusion, and some communities even lived by two clocks, one for local use and one for official dealings. These quirks added a human flavor to what might otherwise have been a purely mechanical system. The beauty of the time zone system is that it balances order with flexibility. The neat mathematical principle of 15 degrees provides the skeleton, but the living flesh of the map reflects human needs, political choices, and geographic constraints. It's a reminder that time, though rooted in the rotation of the Earth, is also a human construct, bent and shaped to fit the realities of life on the ground. Over time, the 24-hour system became so ingrained that it's now difficult to imagine the world without it. International flights, global finance, and digital communication all depend on the certainty that when it's midnight in London, it's 5 a.m. in New Delhi and 1 p.m. in Sydney. The system may not be perfect, but it provides a common language of hours that allows billions of people to coordinate across vast distances. The drawing of the zones was one of humanity's great collective acts of organization, a moment when practicality triumphed over parochialism. It shows that even in something as abstract as time, cooperation was possible. And though the lines on the map may twist and bend, their purpose remains steady, to give the world a shared rhythm, a framework that allows trains to run, ships to sail, and conversations to flow across continents. When you glance at a world clock today, you're looking at the legacy of those decisions, the grand design of a system that carved the spinning globe into 24 slices of time. It's an invisible architecture that underlies modern life, a structure so familiar we hardly notice it, yet so essential that the world would descend into chaos without it. The drawing of the zones wasn't just cartography. It was the shaping of time itself, a quiet revolution that continues to tick in the background of every life on Earth. There is a peculiar line drawn across the vast Pacific Ocean, one that doesn't follow mountains or rivers or any natural feature at all. It's known as the International Date Line, and it's where today and tomorrow shake hands, where calendars flip forward or back depending on the direction of your journey. It's not a wall, nor even a perfectly straight line, but it holds the power to tell you whether you're living in the present, the past, or already in the future. The idea is rooted in the simple geometry of the Earth. Since Greenwich was chosen as zero longitude, the line directly opposite, at 180 degrees, naturally became the place where the global reckoning of time completes its circle. As the Earth spins, every location eastward from Greenwich adds hours, while every location westward subtracts them. By the time you reach halfway around the planet, the difference between the two directions is a full 24 hours. Somewhere, there has to be a boundary where one day becomes the next. That boundary is the International Date Line. Unlike the neat slices of time zones drawn on charts, the date line has a wobbly, human quality to it. It doesn't run straight down the middle of the Pacific, but bends and zigzags to accommodate the scattered islands that dot the ocean. No country wants to be cut in two by the line, so it swerves around territories, sometimes making dramatic leaps eastward or westward to keep whole nations on the same calendar day. The result is a map that looks less like a ruler-straight meridian and more like a meandering path through the ocean. For island nations, the position of the date line has been a matter of identity and practicality. Samoa, for instance, once sat east of the line, aligning its calendar with the Americas. But in 2011, the Samoan government made a bold decision. It shifted west of the line to align more closely with Australia and New Zealand, its main trading partners. Overnight, an entire day vanished from the local calendar. Thursday, December 29th, was immediately followed by Saturday, December 31st. The citizens of Samoa never experienced December 30th at all. It was a unique example of how geography and economics can conspire to erase a day from history. Such shifts can cause confusion, but also highlight the flexibility of time. The date line isn't enforced by nature, but by agreement. It exists because humanity decided it should, and as such, it can be redrawn when necessary. Nearby Tonga, Fiji, and Kiribati have also lobbied for bends in the line to suit their interests, ensuring that they share the same day as their neighbors and trade partners. These decisions remind us that time, though anchored in the rotation of the Earth, remains a deeply human construct. Travelers crossing the line experience its peculiar magic directly. Fly westward across the Pacific, and you can step off the plane having gained an entire day. It feels almost like time travel. A Thursday repeated, a Friday lived twice. Cross in the opposite direction, and the opposite happens. An entire day vanishes. Leave Japan on a Monday evening, and after a long flight eastward, you may arrive in California earlier that same Monday morning, as though the hours between had been stolen away. The journey across the date line makes it clear that days aren't universal, but relative, tied to where on Earth you stand. This strangeness has long captivated writers and travelers. In Jules Verne's classic tale, Around the World in 80 Days, the protagonist Phileas Fogg famously discovers that he has gained a day by circling the Earth eastward and crossing the date line. His victory in the wager hinges on this very quirk of global time. The story illustrates how the line isn't just a technical detail, but a poetic reminder that our human reckoning of time is fragile and occasionally surprising. Standing on the date line, if one could, would be like straddling two calendars. On one side, it's today. On the other, it's tomorrow. Midnight lies stretched out across the ocean, a shadowy seam joining yesterday to what is yet to come. It invites reflection. What does it mean that people separated by only a few kilometers of water may be living not only in different countries, but in different days altogether? Time here reveals its strange duality, at once scientific and symbolic. In practice, of course, the date line is more often experienced in flight than on the ground. Pilots and sailors must carefully account for its effects when recording logs, lest they find themselves a day off. Astronauts aboard the International Space Station, circling the Earth every 90 minutes, solve the problem by using coordinated universal time, sidestepping the issue altogether. But for those traveling across the Pacific, the date line remains a moment of wonder, a reminder that time zones aren't just abstract concepts, but tangible experiences. The existence of the line also highlights how the world is stitched together. Somewhere there has to be a beginning and an end to the global calendar. And by placing it in the sparsely populated Pacific, humanity ensured that the disruption would be minimal. Imagine if the date line ran through Europe, or the Americas. Splitting nations into two different days, the practical headaches would be endless. Instead, the Pacific, vast and dotted with small islands, became the ideal canvas for this invisible seam. Yet even here, the line tells stories about power and connection. Colonial empires once imposed their preferences on these islands, deciding whether they should be aligned with the East or the West. Today, independent nations continue to assert their place on the global calendar, shifting time when it suits their needs. The dateline is both an artifact of geography and a symbol of independence, a place where nations declare how they wish to be oriented in the world. Perhaps the most enchanting aspect of the international dateline is its reminder that time is both rigid and malleable. The Earth rotates with clockwork precision, completing a turn every 24 hours. Yet the way we divide those hours and the way we choose to mark the boundaries between days is a human story. It shows that time isn't only measured but negotiated, a compromise between the relentless spin of the planet and the needs of the people who inhabit it. The dateline invites a sense of humility, too. It reminds us that our calendars and clocks are conveniences, not cosmic truths. The sun rises and sets regardless of whether we call the day Tuesday or Wednesday. The Earth doesn't know what tomorrow means, and yet for us, that line matters deeply, shaping our sense of continuity, our schedules, and even our history. When Samoa skipped a day in 2011, it underscored just how much time depends on human decision-making. So the next time you glance at a globe and see that wiggly line across the Pacific, imagine what it represents, a place where yesterday and tomorrow touch, where days are made and unmade by the sweep of an invisible boundary. The international dateline is one of the strangest borders on Earth, not of land or sea, but of time itself, proof that even in the most abstract realms, geography continues to shape the human story. When the great empires of the 19th and early 20th centuries stretched their banners across oceans, they didn't only redraw borders and extract resources, they also reached into the very fabric of daily life, altering the way millions of people measured their hours. Time, once bound to the movement of the sun and the rhythms of local life, was increasingly set according to the clocks of distant capitals. It was one of the quietest yet most pervasive tools of control, a way for empires to impose order not only over land and people, but over the ticking of every day. Colonial powers needed time to run smoothly. Administration sprawled across vast territories required schedules for railways, shipping, communications, and bureaucracy. British officials in India, French administrators in West Africa, and Dutch traders in the East Indies all understood that empire demanded coordination. Local times, charming though they might have been in a village square or marketplace, became inconvenient when governing millions of people spread across thousands of kilometers. Standard time was efficiency, and efficiency was power. India provides one of the clearest examples. Before British rule, communities across the subcontinent followed local solar time. Noon in Bombay wasn't the same as noon in Kolkata, and nobody was particularly troubled by the difference. But as railways expanded under colonial management in the 19th century, these variations became chaotic. British authorities imposed a single standard, Indian Standard Time, set at 5:12 hours ahead of Greenwich. It wasn't chosen because it perfectly reflected the sun over India, but because it offered a compromise that kept the colony running on the same schedule. Trains ran more safely, telegrams aligned neatly, and the machinery of empire ticked in unison. The choice also had symbolic weight. Millions of lives now marched to a rhythm dictated by the imperial power in London. Similar stories unfolded across Africa. European powers carved up the continent with little regard for its cultures or geography, and when they imposed time zones, they followed their own convenience rather than local needs. In French colonies, the clocks were synchronized with Paris, in British territories with Greenwich. This alignment meant more than scheduling ships or railways. It was a daily reminder that the colonizers' time took precedence, that the empire's heartbeat set the pace for everyone within its grasp. In the Dutch East Indies, today's Indonesia, the imposition of standardized time zones reflected both commerce and control. The islands sprawl across an enormous expanse, naturally spanning multiple hours of difference. Yet the colonial government sought to tie them together under systems that simplified trade and administration. The division of the archipelago into zones that aligned with Dutch interests made it easier to coordinate exports of coffee, sugar, and spices, binding local farmers into a timetable that suited European markets more than their own. Trade was indeed one of the strongest forces driving this imperial timekeeping. Global commerce required synchronization, and the empires of the 19th century were nothing if not engines of trade. Ships leaving African ports laden with palm oil or cocoa needed to arrive in Liverpool or Marseille on predictable schedules. Telegraph cables stretched under the seas demanded that messages be stamped with a consistent hour. Every minute mattered in a world where competition between empires was fierce, and control over time itself became part of the infrastructure of dominance. The imposition of foreign time could be disorienting to local communities. Farmers in rural India or West Africa still rose with the dawn, regardless of what the railway timetable said. But as urban centers grew and colonial bureaucracies expanded, the authority of the clock spread deeper into daily life. Schools, government offices, and courts all began to operate on the standardized hours, gradually pulling populations into step with the rhythms of empire. Even the ringing of bells or the call to prayer might be nudged to align more closely with official schedules. Time became an expression of political authority, as real and binding as taxes or law. The link between empire and time zones was also evident in the symbolism of Greenwich itself. The adoption of the Greenwich meridian as the global standard in 1884 wasn't only a matter of practicality. It was also a reflection of British dominance at the height of its imperial reach. By anchoring the world's clocks to London, the empire placed itself at the center of global order. Other powers grumbled. France clung stubbornly to the Paris meridian for decades, but the momentum of empire was undeniable. To check the time in New York or Cape Town or Bombay was, in a sense, to acknowledge London's primacy. These choices left legacies that still shape the modern world. India continues to use its peculiar half-hour offset, a colonial-era compromise that remains long after independence. Much of Africa remains aligned with European time zones, reflecting decisions made in colonial offices rather than by local communities. In some cases, countries have adjusted, but the imprint of empire is still visible in the map of global time. China offers a particularly striking case. Though not formally colonized in the same way as Africa or India, it endured enormous pressure from Western powers in the 19th century. Today, despite spanning nearly 5 natural time zones, the entire nation observes a single clock, Beijing time. This centralization reflects political decisions in the 20th century. But it also echoes the imperial principle that unity is achieved by imposing one standard across vast lands, regardless of local reality. In the far western region of Xinjiang, the sun may not rise until 10 in the morning according to the clock, a daily reminder of how political power dictates the rhythm of life. The story of time and empire is, in the end, a story of control disguised as practicality. Standardized time zones did indeed make railways safer, trade smoother, and communication faster. But they also served as subtle instruments of authority, folding colonies into the schedules of faraway capitals. The daily life of millions was reordered, not because it was convenient for them, but because it was convenient for empire. And yet, like so many imperial legacies, the imposed order of time endured beyond the empires themselves. Even after independence, many nations kept the time zones left to them, sometimes out of inertia, sometimes because by then the new rhythms had become too ingrained to change. The global system of hours, born of both science and imperial ambition, remains with us, shaping the way we live and coordinate across the planet. It's curious to think that something as intimate as checking the hour on a wristwatch carries echoes of colonial history. Beneath the quiet tick of the second hand lies a story of empire seeking to align the world with their own ambitions. The sun still rises, as it always has, indifferent to human borders. But the way we divide its passage through the sky bears the marks of centuries of conquest, trade, and control. In this way, the map of time is also a map of empire, a reminder that even the hours can be colonized. The notion of moving the clock forward to make better use of daylight is one of those ideas that sounds both ingenious and absurd, depending on how much sleep you value. Daylight saving time, as it has come to be known, is the practice of shifting the hours twice a year, springing forward in the warmer months to extend the evening light and falling back again in autumn to reclaim those lost mornings. Few topics in timekeeping have stirred as much debate, confusion, and outright irritation. Yet the story of daylight saving is also a curious chapter in the geography of time, one that reveals how societies wrestle with the balance between natural light and human schedules. The first person often credited with the idea was Benjamin Franklin, who in 1784 jokingly suggested that Parisians could save on candles if they woke earlier in the summer to take advantage of the morning sun. Franklin's satire wasn't a serious proposal, but the seed of the concept had been planted. In the late 19th century, a New Zealand entomologist named George Vernon Hudson began arguing in earnest for shifting the clocks to allow more daylight for his insect collecting after work. Around the same time, a British builder named William Willett campaigned for the change, believing it would improve health and productivity. He even wrote pamphlets extolling the virtues of making better use of the long summer evenings. Despite these early advocates, the idea didn't gain traction until the pressures of the First World War. In 1916, Germany became the first nation to adopt daylight saving time, reasoning that longer daylight in the evening would reduce the need for artificial lighting and conserve coal for the war effort. Britain, the United States, and many other nations soon followed. For governments grappling with resource shortages, the logic was persuasive. Shifting the clocks could save energy without building new power plants or cutting into industrial output. The war ended, but daylight saving lingered. Some countries abandoned it, only to reintroduce it later during the Second World War, again with the rationale of saving fuel and boosting efficiency. The practice spread unevenly, sometimes disappearing for decades, only to resurface when energy crises or political arguments reignited the debate. Each time it returned, it brought with it both enthusiastic supporters and grumbling detractors. Proponents of daylight saving argue that the system makes intuitive sense. Why waste daylight in the early morning when most people are asleep, when those hours could instead be shifted into the evening when more people are active? Extra evening light encourages outdoor activity, reduces traffic accidents, and in theory saves energy by cutting the demand for artificial lighting. Advocates point to studies suggesting modest reductions in electricity use, particularly in earlier decades when lighting consumed a greater share of household power. Critics, however, counter that the costs outweigh the benefits. Sleep disruption tops the list of complaints. Each spring, when the clocks leap forward, millions of people lose an hour of rest, leading to groggy mornings, decreased productivity, and in some cases, measurable spikes in accidents and health problems. Hospitals report slight increases in heart attacks after the transition, and roads become a little more dangerous as drivers adjust. Whatever energy savings may exist, they're often offset by higher demand for heating or cooling at different times of day. And while longer evenings may be pleasant, darker mornings leave school children and commuters stumbling through the dawn. The uneven adoption of daylight saving around the globe has created a patchwork of quirks. Some nations embrace it wholeheartedly, others reject it entirely, and some use it in only part of their territory. Australia is a prime example. The southern states, such as New South Wales and Victoria, move their clocks, while Queensland and Western Australia do not, leading to confusion for anyone trying to arrange phone calls or flights across the country. In the United States, Arizona and Hawaii stand apart, refusing to observe daylight saving, meaning that the same state may be aligned with California in winter, but with Colorado in summer. The result is a calendar of shifting alignments that tests the patience of anyone scheduling across borders. Local experiments have sometimes bordered on the eccentric. During the Second World War, the United States adopted wartime, pushing the clocks forward an extra hour beyond the usual daylight saving. In Britain, double summer time was introduced, with clocks shifted 2 hours ahead in summer, meaning long evenings stretched deep into the twilight. Farmers in northern latitudes were less than amused, finding themselves tending fields at strange hours while the sun refused to cooperate with the official time. These experiments revealed the limits of manipulating the clock. The Earth's rotation remains unbothered by human adjustments. One of the enduring curiosities of daylight saving is how passionately people argue for or against it. To some, the longer evenings of summer are a gift, offering more hours for leisure and social life. To others, the disruption of twice-yearly clock changes feels unnecessary and irritating, a relic of earlier times when energy savings mattered more than they do today. Surveys in many countries reveal populations split nearly down the middle, with as many calling for abolition as for retention. In recent years, the debate has grown louder. The European Union has considered abolishing the seasonal clock changes altogether, allowing each member state to decide whether to stay on summertime or wintertime year-round. In the United States, proposals surface regularly in Congress to make daylight saving permanent, eliminating the ritual of springing forward and falling back. The arguments now focus less on saving fuel and more on quality of life, with advocates claiming that a stable system would be healthier and less confusing. What makes daylight saving especially fascinating is that it exposes the tension between natural cycles and human invention. Time zones already reflect compromises between geography and politics, but daylight saving takes it one step further by adjusting not only to longitude, but to the season. It's a reminder that time is never just a neutral measurement, but a system humans continuously mold to fit their needs, even if those needs change with history. And so, twice each year, millions of people dutifully reset their clocks, grumble about lost sleep, or rejoice in extra evening light, all because of a decision made decades ago in a very different world. Whether one loves or hates it, Daylight saving is a striking example of how deeply society is willing to bend time to its will. It shows that hours aren't only markers of the sun's passage, but tools of policy, shaped by wars, economies, and cultural preferences. The debate, it seems, will never quite settle. Perhaps one day the world will decide to abandon the shifting altogether, choosing either permanent daylight saving or permanent standard time. Until then, the arguments will continue to circle like the seasons themselves. Some will cheer for the golden evenings, others will lament the dark mornings, and everyone, at least once a year, will find themselves asking the eternal question, why do we keep doing this to ourselves? Daylight saving is proof that while the earth spins with unchanging rhythm, humanity cannot resist tinkering with the clock. In that sense, it's as much a cultural phenomenon as a scientific one, a reflection of our desire to master time, even if it means spending a century arguing about whether the practice makes sense at all. There's a peculiar sensation that creeps over the body after a long flight, one that makes your eyelids heavy in the middle of the day and leaves you wide awake when the rest of the world is fast asleep. It's called jet lag, a modern affliction born of the collision between human biology and globalized time. For most of history, people lived at the pace of their own longitude. Travel was slow enough that the body could adjust gradually to changes in daylight. But with the advent of airplanes crossing continents in mere hours, the body clock suddenly found itself out of step with the sun, leaving travelers stranded in a kind of temporal limbo. At the heart of this strange experience lies the circadian rhythm, the internal cycle that governs when you feel awake, when you feel sleepy, and even when your body digests food or regulates hormones. Circadian rhythms are tuned to roughly 24 hours, a pattern that evolved in harmony with the Earth's rotation. The rising and setting of the sun provides the strongest signal, but other cues, such as meal times, social interactions, and even temperature, reinforce the body's sense of time. Like a carefully wound watch, the circadian system ticks away in the background, quietly orchestrating the ebb and flow of daily life. When you leap across time zones, that internal watch doesn't instantly reset. Imagine flying from London to Tokyo, a journey that shifts you 9 hours ahead. Your body still believes it's nighttime when the local clock insists it's morning. The result is a mismatch between internal time and external time. This is the essence of jet lag. Your biology clings to one day while your surroundings demand another. Sleep becomes fractured, meals feel out of place, and concentration falters. It's a peculiar kind of displacement, not of geography, but of hours. The symptoms are familiar to anyone who has crossed an ocean. Fatigue washes over you at odd moments, hunger strikes when local restaurants are closed, and alertness deserts you when you most need it. Some describe it as a mental fog, others as a physical heaviness. The body is, in effect, running on 2 clocks at once, with the internal rhythm dragging behind like a stubborn traveler, unwilling to acknowledge the new schedule. Science has revealed that the circadian system is more deeply embedded than many once thought. At the core is the suprachiasmatic nucleus, a tiny cluster of neurons in the brain's hypothalamus that acts as the master clock. This central timekeeper receives signals from the eyes about light and darkness, adjusting its cycle to align with the environment. But the influence spreads far beyond the brain. Every organ, from the liver to the heart, has its own clock genes, ticking in synchrony with the master. Jet lag disrupts this harmony, leaving the body's systems temporarily out of tune. Light plays the most powerful role in resetting the body clock. Exposure to bright light in the morning can nudge the rhythm forward, helping travelers adjust when moving eastward, while evening light can help when moving west. But the adjustment is gradual, usually shifting by only 1 or 2 hours per day. This is why crossing multiple zones overwhelms the system. The body simply cannot leap as quickly as the airplane does. A flight from New York to Paris might take just 7 hours, but the body may need nearly a week to settle into the new rhythm. There are, of course, strategies people attempt to soften the blow. Some adjust their sleeping and eating schedules before travel, easing into the new time zone. Others rely on melatonin supplements, which can signal the body that it's time to sleep. Airlines dim their cabin lights in an attempt to coax passengers into the right rhythm. Yet no trick fully erases the dislocation, because the circadian system is designed to resist sudden change. Its stubbornness, in a way, is a survival feature, keeping our ancestors aligned with the predictable cycle of day and night. Jet lag isn't merely an inconvenience. It can affect health in subtle ways. Sleep deprivation weakens concentration and mood, and repeated disruption of circadian rhythms may strain the immune system or metabolism. Flight crews who constantly cross time zones are studied closely by researchers as their bodies endure chronic misalignment. Even without travel, similar disruptions occur in shift workers, whose schedules often force them to be awake at night and asleep during the day. Both cases reveal that the human body is still firmly tied to the planet's rotation, no matter how modern technology may tempt us to believe otherwise. There's also a curious asymmetry to jet lag. Traveling eastward is usually harder than traveling west. When flying east, the day shortens, and the body must advance its internal clock, which it does reluctantly. Flying west lengthens the day, and the body seems more forgiving when asked to stay awake longer. A trip from Los Angeles to London often feels more brutal than the reverse, a quirk of biology that travelers quickly learn to respect. For all its discomfort, jet lag is also a reminder of how extraordinary our modern world has become. The very possibility of being time displaced depends on the ability to cross half the globe in less than a day, a feat unimaginable to our ancestors. Marco Polo didn't suffer jet lag. His journeys unfolded slowly enough that the body could keep pace. The ailment belongs exclusively to the jet age, a byproduct of our triumph over geography and distance. Some even find poetry in it. To be awake when a city slumbers, to wander its streets while caught between 2 time zones, is to experience a place in a strangely intimate way. The body may protest, but the mind sometimes delights in the peculiar freedom of inhabiting multiple hours at once. It's as though you're both here and elsewhere, carrying a piece of your homeland's clock in your bones while surrounded by the cadence of a foreign land. The persistence of jet lag also underscores the limits of human control over time. We can slice the globe into zones, coordinate clocks down to fractions of a second, and even adjust the calendar with leap years. But our biology remains tied to light and dark in ways we cannot easily override. Each sunrise and sunset still dictates terms, even if airplanes try to defy them. In a world where global travel is routine, jet lag has become one of the small tolls we pay for living in a divided clockwork. Business travelers, holiday makers, and athletes competing internationally all grapple with the cost of crossing hours too quickly. It's a reminder that while we have conquered distance with technology, we have not yet conquered time within ourselves. Perhaps that's part of its enduring fascination. Jet lag humbles us, grounding us in biology even as we soar above the clouds. It shows that no matter how sophisticated our machines, our bodies still live by the turning of the earth. The foggy mornings and restless nights that follow a long journey aren't flaws of the system, but signs of our deep connection to the planet's rhythm. In this way, jet lag isn't just an inconvenience, but a quiet testament to the fact that time isn't entirely ours to command. There are places on Earth where the usual markers of time vanish, where the sun forgets to set or refuses to rise for weeks and even months on end. These are the polar regions, the high latitudes that circle the Arctic and Antarctic. Here, the neat rhythm of sunrise and sunset that most of humanity relies upon simply doesn't exist. Instead, entire seasons are bathed in continuous daylight or plunged into unbroken night. For those who live and work in these extremes, time takes on a surreal quality, forcing humans to invent their own schedules in the absence of the natural cues that have guided us since the beginning. The reason for this strangeness lies in the tilt of the Earth's axis. Leaning at about 23.12 degrees, our planet ensures that during summer in the Arctic, the sun never dips below the horizon for weeks at a stretch. The opposite occurs in winter, when the same tilt leaves the region tilted away from the sun, creating long months of darkness. At the poles themselves, this cycle is even more pronounced. The sun rises only once a year, climbing slowly above the horizon in spring, circling the sky endlessly, and then sinking again in autumn. Between those two events lies 6 months of day and 6 months of night, a rhythm unlike anywhere else on Earth. For those accustomed to daily sunrises and sunsets, experiencing this is disorienting. In the Arctic summer, the midnight sun shines with an eerie brightness, turning landscapes silver and gold long after the clock insists it's night. Shadows stretch strangely, the air feels suspended in perpetual twilight, and sleep becomes elusive when the body cannot tell the difference between day and night. In winter, the opposite prevails. The polar night envelops everything, broken only by faint twilight at noon or the flicker of the northern lights. Life unfolds in a world of darkness, where human-made light becomes the only guide. Communities in the Arctic, from northern Norway to Alaska and Siberia, have lived with these conditions for centuries. Traditional practices adapted to the cycle, with hunting, fishing, and social activities shifting according to the seasons rather than the hour. Modern towns, however, must make choices about how to handle daily schedules. In Svalbard, Norway, for example, residents follow Central European time year-round, even though the sun ignores such conventions. Shops still open in the morning and close in the evening, school bells still ring, and work days still end. But the division is entirely artificial. People rely on clocks rather than the sky to structure their lives, a reversal of the natural order. Antarctica presents an even stranger challenge. No permanent population lives on the frozen continent. But research stations from many nations dot the icy expanse. With no time zone imposed by geography, each station chooses its own. Some follow the time of the country that operates them, others align with the nearest supply base, often in Chile or New Zealand. At McMurdo Station, run by the United States, clocks keep New Zealand time, meaning that workers on the far side of the world live their daily lives as though they were in Auckland. At the Amundsen Scott South Pole Station, schedules are set to match supply flights from New Zealand as well. Though the sun itself circles lazily in the sky for months without ever rising or setting, this artificial imposition of time leads to surreal situations. A researcher might glance out a window at midnight and see blazing daylight, or at noon find themselves surrounded by total darkness. Daily routines, breakfast at 8, lunch at noon, dinner at 6, continue as if the sun were playing along, even though it's not. Time in such places becomes a matter of agreement, a shared fiction that keeps communities functioning. Without it, the lack of natural cues would dissolve the structure of life into chaos. The human body, however, doesn't always accept this fiction easily. Circadian rhythms rely heavily on light, and in polar regions, the abundance or absence of sunlight can wreak havoc on sleep patterns. During the endless summer day, blackout curtains become essential, shielding bedrooms from the persistent glare of the midnight sun. Even then, some find themselves restless, their bodies resisting the command to sleep. In winter, the opposite problem emerges. Constant darkness disrupts mood and energy, often leading to fatigue or seasonal depression. Artificial lighting is used strategically, with bright lamps mimicking sunlight to help regulate the body's internal clock. Psychological adaptation is as important as physical adjustment. In long polar winters, communities create routines and celebrations to maintain morale. Festivals, concerts, and shared meals punctuate the months of night, anchoring people in a sense of time that the sun refuses to provide. In research stations, strict schedules of work, exercise, and leisure help prevent monotony from eroding well-being. The challenge isn't only to endure the absence of daylight, but to create meaning in its place, to remind oneself that hours and days still exist, even when the horizon insists otherwise. The natural spectacle of these regions adds to the sense of otherworldliness. During the polar night, the aurora borealis and aurora australis shimmer across the sky, their shifting curtains of green, red, and purple, providing a reminder of the cosmos beyond. In summer, the endless light paints glaciers and mountains in hues that change subtly through the day, though never fade completely. Time seems to stretch and blur, less a cycle of distinct days and more a continuous flow, a reminder that the familiar rhythm of sunrise and sunset is only one version of what time can look like. For scientists working in Antarctica or for indigenous peoples of the Arctic, adaptation to these extremes has become second nature. But for visitors, the experience can feel profoundly unsettling. Tourists to places like Tromsø in Norway or Barrow in Alaska often marvel at the midnight sun, only to find themselves exhausted when their bodies refuse to cooperate. In winter, the endless darkness can be both magical and oppressive, leaving one unsure whether the day has truly begun. The polar regions expose just how much our sense of time is psychological, rooted in expectation as much as in the clock. Interestingly, technology has both eased and complicated this experience. Electric light allows people to create their own day in the midst of darkness, while heating makes life possible where it once would have been unimaginable. Yet at the same time, the intrusion of global communication and schedules means that people in polar regions are often tied to the rhythms of distant places. A video call with colleagues in Europe or North America must fit their daylight hours, even if it takes place in the middle of a polar night. The globalization of time presses into these extremes, layering artificial schedules on top of already surreal conditions. Ultimately, life at the poles is a vivid reminder that time is a blend of natural law and human invention. The Earth turns with its steady tilt, producing seasons of light and dark that defy our usual expectations. In response, humans impose their own structure, choosing time zones, setting alarms, and insisting on daily rhythms that bear little resemblance to the sky outside. It's a negotiation between biology, geography, and necessity. The polar regions show that time isn't a universal experience, but a local one. What feels like noon in one place can feel like midnight in another, and in some places, the very concept of noon or midnight loses its meaning entirely. For those who live there, adaptation isn't optional. It's survival. The endless light and endless night stretch the imagination, reminding us that our familiar days of sunrise and sunset are just one way to inhabit the planet's turning. To live at the poles is to experience time in its most extreme form, stripped of its usual markers, demanding that humans supply their own. It's strange, disorienting, and sometimes challenging, but it's also a glimpse into the profound flexibility of the human spirit. Even in a world without dawn or dusk, people find ways to mark their hours, to carve meaning out of the turning earth, and to remind themselves that even when the sun disappears, time carries on. Look at a world map of time zones, and you might expect to see neat slices, each an hour wide, stepping across the globe like evenly cut segments of an orange. But the reality is far messier. Human beings have never been content with tidy geometry when it comes to time. Instead, the map is a patchwork of half-hours, quarter-hours, and curious offsets that reveal just how political, cultural, and stubbornly human the clock can be. Perhaps the most famous example of this untidiness is Nepal. Instead of aligning with the standard whole-hour offsets used by most of the world, Nepal set its clocks 5 hours and 45 minutes ahead of Greenwich. This quarter-hour difference wasn't chosen out of astronomical necessity, but as a statement of independence. Nestled between India and China, both giants with their own standardized times, Nepal carved out its own slice of temporal identity. The choice of a 15-minute deviation may seem trivial, but it proclaims to the world that Nepal has its own rhythm, a deliberate refusal to let its hours be dictated entirely by neighbors. India itself opted for a half-hour compromise. At 5:12 hours ahead of Greenwich, Indian Standard Time was designed to bridge the wide geography of the subcontinent. With its capital in Delhi and major commercial hub in Mumbai, the country sits awkwardly between two natural time zones. Rather than choose one over the other, the colonial authorities who established the standard in the 19th century settled on a middle path. That decision carried into independence and still defines the hours of more than 1 billion people today. India's half-hour offset remains one of the quirks of global time, an everyday reminder of how history and politics shape the clock. These irregularities aren't confined to South Asia. Australia has long embraced the art of unconventional offsets. The country spans 3 main time zones, but several states and territories have chosen their own variations. South Australia and the Northern Territory sit half an hour behind the East Coast, while tiny Lord Howe Island, lying off the coast of New South Wales, is 30 minutes ahead of Sydney. For anyone arranging calls or flights across the country, the result can feel like a temporal jigsaw puzzle, with each piece refusing to line up neatly with the others. Elsewhere, the eccentricities multiply. In Canada's Newfoundland, the official time is set at 3:12 hours behind Greenwich, another half-hour decision rooted in local pride and practicality. In Myanmar, the offset is 6:12 hours ahead. Iran has long observed a time offset of 3:12 hours. Though it has shifted in and out of daylight saving with enough regularity to baffle anyone keeping track, even parts of tiny territories have embraced unique schedules. In the Chatham Islands of New Zealand, the local clocks are 45 minutes ahead of the mainland, a deviation that feels almost whimsical. Why do these quirks persist? Part of the reason lies in politics. Time isn't only about aligning with the sun, but also about aligning with identity. A nation that tweaks its offset by half an hour or 15 minutes is making a statement that it will not simply conform to the expectations of larger neighbors. For small or newly independent countries, adopting a unique time can be a subtle but powerful assertion of sovereignty. It says, Our hours belong to us. Convenience also plays a role. For sprawling nations, one time zone may not fit comfortably. China famously keeps all of its vast territory on a single standard, Beijing time, but other countries have chosen to bend the rules rather than stretch them. India's half-hour offset was an attempt to balance East and West. Newfoundland's choice reflected a desire to distinguish itself from mainland Canada while still keeping business practical. These decisions are rarely about astronomical accuracy and almost always about social or political compromise. Another reason for the irregularities is the sheer human refusal to let time be too orderly. The idea of dividing the globe into 24 exact slices of 15 degrees each makes sense mathematically, but human lives are lived in villages, cities, and nations that don't sit neatly on such lines. Mountains, rivers, and borders shape communities more than longitude does. A zone may curve around a country's edge or leap across a sea simply because it would be impractical to split a population in two. Out of these practical bends emerge the odd little offsets, preserved like wrinkles in a carefully ironed shirt. The result is a world map of time that is anything but uniform. Look closely, and you see the handprints of history everywhere. Half-hours and quarter-hours are remnants of colonial compromises, nationalist gestures, or simple accidents of geography. They're evidence that while we live in an interconnected world, local quirks still thrive, resisting the march toward universal order. For travelers, these quirks can be both charming and maddening. Landing in Nepal and discovering the clocks are 15 minutes off. The expected schedule feels almost like a prank. Booking a flight into Newfoundland may leave you double-checking your watch to ensure you've accounted for the extra half hour. For the people who live there, though, these peculiarities become normal. Time is local, and if the world outside finds it odd, so be it. In some ways, these irregularities add richness to the global story of time. They remind us that hours aren't dictated solely by the Earth's spin, but by human choice. Time zones are human inventions, tools for cooperation and identity alike. The fact that we've bent and twisted them into such strange shapes shows our determination to make time serve us rather than the other way around. And so the world ticks on, not in neat slices, but in a patchwork quilt of hours and half-hours, whole days and missing minutes. It's a map that tells as much about culture and politics as it does about longitude. When you glance at a clock and see an unusual offset, you're glimpsing the stubborn individuality of a place, its refusal to be fully absorbed into a global system. In the end, the untidy map of time zones is a reminder that while humans may seek order, we rarely achieve it perfectly. The crooked lines, the half-hour zones, and the quirky 15-minute deviations speak of compromise, pride, and a touch of whimsy. They show that time, like history itself, is rarely straight and often full of delightful irregularities. The sun may rise and set with mathematical precision, but the hours we use to mark its passage are thoroughly, wonderfully human. In the old days, keeping time meant watching the sun or listening for the town clock. In the modern world, it means looking to atoms, the smallest building blocks of matter whose vibrations tick away with a precision that no pendulum or spring could ever hope to match. Atomic clocks have quietly become the heartbeat of civilization, their steady rhythm governing everything from financial markets to global communication. They're invisible to most of us, yet every email, every online purchase, every navigation app owes its accuracy to these silent guardians of time. The principle of an atomic clock is as elegant as it is profound. Instead of relying on gears or weights, atomic clocks measure the vibrations of atoms, usually cesium or rubidium. Atoms oscillate at frequencies so regular that they make even the most finely tuned mechanical watch look sloppy. Cesium atoms, for instance, resonate exactly 9,992, 631,170 times per second. This extraordinary constancy defines the very second itself. In 1967, the international community agreed to set the length of a second not by the rotation of the Earth, which wobbles and drifts ever so slightly, but by the vibration of cesium atoms. Time was no longer tied to the heavens, but to the unchanging pulse of matter. The significance of this shift is enormous. The Earth's rotation is steady, but it's not perfectly reliable. Tidal forces, earthquakes, and even melting glaciers can subtly alter its pace. Atomic clocks, by contrast, tick with a stability so fine they may lose less than a second over millions of years. That kind of accuracy underpins modern life in ways few realize. The navigation system in your phone, for instance, depends on atomic clocks orbiting above you in satellites. Without their perfect synchronization, GPS would drift hopelessly, and your map would place you kilometers from your actual location. Each GPS satellite carries multiple atomic clocks, and they beam their time signals down to Earth. Your device receives signals from several satellites at once and calculates your exact position by comparing their minuscule differences in arrival times. This only works because the clocks in the satellites and those on Earth are synchronized to extraordinary precision. Even an error of a billionth of a second could translate into a mistake of nearly 30 centimeters on the ground. Thanks to atomic clocks, pilots can land aircraft with pinpoint accuracy. Ships can navigate safely through crowded harbors, and farmers can guide tractors across fields with centimeter-perfect precision. The need for perfect timing doesn't stop at navigation. Modern finance depends on it as well. Stock exchanges around the world process trades in microseconds, and the exact order of transactions matters. To ensure fairness, regulators require that financial institutions synchronize their systems to atomic time. Without this common clock, disputes over who bought or sold first would become endless. In a sense, the beating heart of global markets isn't on the trading floor, but inside the cesium atoms that define the seconds. The same is true for telecommunications. The internet may feel like a chaotic web of connections, but underneath it relies on perfect coordination. Every packet of data, every video stream, every phone call that hops between continents is stamped with a time signature. These timestamps ensure that information arrives in the right order, that signals don't overlap or collapse into noise. Behind the scenes, servers across the world quietly synchronize with atomic time, often through a system known as the Network Time Protocol. This digital handshake keeps computers on the same page, no matter how far apart they may be. Think of the marvel it represents. Billions of devices, from supercomputers in data centers to smartphones in pockets, all agree on what time it is within fractions of a second. It's a level of coordination unprecedented in history. In earlier centuries, even neighboring towns might disagree about the hour. Now, thanks to the invisible web of atomic clocks and networks, humanity ticks in unison, the global conversation flowing as smoothly as if everyone were sitting in the same room. This synchrony has even reshaped science. Astronomers use networks of radio telescopes spread across continents to study distant galaxies and black holes. To make this work, each telescope must record observations at precisely the same instant. Atomic clocks make this possible, linking instruments thousands of kilometers apart into one giant virtual eye. In physics laboratories, experiments probing the tiniest particles or the deepest mysteries of the universe rely on timing systems so precise they can measure intervals shorter than a trillionth of a second. It's easy to overlook all of this when checking the time on a phone or glancing at a laptop clock. The simplicity hides an astonishing infrastructure. Behind the glow of the screen lies a lattice of satellites, servers, observatories, and laboratories, all bound together by the pulse of atoms. Without it, flights would wander, communication would falter, and commerce would stumble. Time, in its digital form, has become the silent glue that holds the modern world together. And yet this perfection isn't entirely detached from the Earth. Because atomic time ticks more steadily than the planet rotates, a small gap opens between them. To keep our clocks in step with the natural day, scientists occasionally add a leap second to coordinated universal time. These small adjustments remind us that while atoms may be ideal timekeepers, we still care about the relationship between our clocks and the turning of the planet. Midnight, after all, still feels like it ought to come when the sun is on the far side of the Earth. The story of digital synchrony is, in a way, the opposite of the old struggle with local times and irregular zones. Where once each town kept its own hours, now the entire globe hums with a shared rhythm. The internet doesn't care whether you're in Tokyo or Buenos Aires. The data flows only because everyone's clocks agree. This is the quiet triumph of the modern age. A world united not just by trade or communication, but by time itself. So the next time you tap a button on your phone and watch a map appear, or stream a video from the other side of the world without a hiccup, remember the atoms ticking away in laboratories and satellites. They're the unseen custodians of modern life, the pulse behind every digital heartbeat. In their vibration lies the synchrony that makes a connected world possible. Time has always been a human creation, shaped and reshaped to fit our needs. But in the age of atoms and networks, it has become more precise, more universal, and more quietly powerful than ever before. Across the world, time isn't only measured by clocks and calendars, but also by culture. The way people relate to punctuality, waiting, or the pace of daily life varies enormously from one society to another. For some, being 5 minutes late to a meeting's unthinkable, a breach of discipline and respect. For others, arriving half an hour after the appointed time is entirely normal, even expected. These differences reveal that time is never purely objective. It's also a deeply human story, shaped by geography, climate, history, and the values of each community. The Western industrial tradition is perhaps most strongly associated with what might be called clock time. In much of Northern Europe and North America, punctuality is treated as a virtue, a sign of efficiency, reliability, and respect for others. The roots of this attitude stretch back to the rise of industrial capitalism, when factory bells and railway timetables demanded strict adherence to schedules. In this world, time is money, and lateness costs productivity. The clock rules not only the workplace, but also social life. Arriving on time to dinner or a meeting demonstrates seriousness, while tardiness risks being read as carelessness. Contrast this with societies where event time predominates. In many parts of Africa, the Middle East, Latin America, and the Pacific Islands, schedules are often guided less by the clock and more by the flow of events. A wedding begins when the guests have gathered and the hosts are ready, not precisely at 3. A conversation ends when everyone has said what they need to say, not when the hour hand points to a certain mark. Here, relationships and circumstances dictate the rhythm of the day, and time bends around human needs rather than the other way around. Neither system is inherently superior. Each reflects the environment and history from which it emerged. In agricultural societies shaped by seasonal cycles, it made sense to structure life around natural rhythms rather than mechanical ones. Rainfall, soil, and sunlight dictated when to plant or harvest, not the ticking of a clock. In hot climates, work may pause during the heat of the day, with activity resuming in the cooler evening hours. The siesta tradition in parts of Spain, Italy, and Latin America reflects this adaptation, blending cultural custom with environmental necessity. In colder northern regions, the demands of surviving long winters and the rise of mechanized industry pushed communities toward greater punctuality. When daylight is scarce, every hour matters. The need to coordinate trains, factories, and offices reinforce the culture of clock time. Geography, in this sense, helps shape attitudes. The same sun and seasons that mark the hours also influence how societies value them. Religion and philosophy also play roles. In many Buddhist and Hindu traditions, time is seen as cyclical, a recurring pattern of birth, death, and rebirth. This view can encourage patience and flexibility, an acceptance that events unfold in their own rhythm. By contrast, the Judeo-Christian and Islamic traditions emphasize linear time, with a clear beginning and end, which may help explain why Western societies shaped by these traditions tend to think of time as something to be counted, scheduled, and saved. History leaves its imprint, too. Colonialism, for example, often imposed Western clock time on societies that had previously followed more flexible systems. Railways and schools introduced rigid schedules, teaching generations to align their lives with the hours of empire. Yet beneath the surface, older rhythms often persisted, creating a dual system in which official life runs on punctuality, while private life flows more loosely. In parts of Africa, this duality still exists, one rhythm for the office, another for the village. The diversity of time perception is also visible in everyday gestures. In Germany, a business meeting scheduled for 9 o'clock in the morning will often begin exactly at 9, with participants arriving a few minutes early. In Brazil, the same meeting might begin closer to 9:30, with nobody offended. In Japan, trains are expected to arrive within seconds of their timetable, and even a 1-minute delay may be announced with an apology. In Ethiopia, by contrast, the day is traditionally measured from dawn, so what's called 10:00 locally may not match what an outsider expects at all. These differences can lead to misunderstandings when cultures meet. A North American executive may feel slighted by what seems like a casual disregard for time in another country, while a host in that country may find the executive's impatience rude. International cooperation, whether in business, diplomacy, or tourism, often requires sensitivity to these varying temporal norms. Understanding that time is experienced differently is as important as understanding language or etiquette. Modern globalization adds a further layer of complexity. The internet, air travel, and global trade demand synchronization across borders, reinforcing clock time as a universal framework. Yet within that framework, local cultures still assert their own rhythms. A video call between London and Nairobi may begin promptly at the scheduled hour, but daily life in each city continues to unfold according to different cultural tempos. Technology may unite the world in seconds, but it doesn't erase the deeper traditions that shape how those seconds are valued. There's also a generational dimension. In many places, younger people accustomed to digital connectivity and fast-paced work adopt stricter punctuality than their elders, who may be more relaxed. At the same time, The rise of flexible working arrangements in parts of the world has reintroduced event-like rhythms, where tasks are completed when finished rather than at a fixed hour. The balance between clock time and event time continues to shift, reminding us that culture isn't static, but evolves with circumstance. Perhaps the most intriguing lesson of cultural time is that humans resist living as machines. Even in societies where punctuality is prized, people carve out moments that defy the clock. Weekends, festivals, and holidays often celebrate timelessness, lingering meals, unhurried gatherings, and dances that stretch into the night. These pauses remind us that while clocks may govern much of modern life, human experience still flows best when given space to unfold. The variety of time across cultures isn't a sign of disunity, but of richness. It demonstrates that time, far from being a cold and universal force, is something shaped by context, by land and climate, by history and philosophy. It shows that our hours and minutes are as much a cultural creation as they are an astronomical one. So the next time you feel impatient because someone is late, or puzzled because an event doesn't begin on time, consider that you may simply be standing at the crossroads of two different temporal traditions. One may prize punctuality, the other may prize presence. Both are valid, both human, and both are ways of making sense of the steady turn of the earth beneath us. The diversity of cultural time is a reminder that there's no single correct rhythm. There are as many ways of living the hours as there are people on the planet, each one a reflection of geography, history, and the values of community. Time, in this sense, isn't just a universal clock ticking away in the background, but a mirror of humanity itself. It's strict in some places, relaxed in others, cyclical here, linear there. It's the railway timetable in Berlin and the lingering festival in Oaxaca, the punctual train in Tokyo, and the leisurely siesta in Seville. Taken together, these rhythms form a mosaic of human experience, each tile unique, yet all fitting within the grand design of a planet that spins day after day beneath the same sun. Time may seem like the most neutral of measurements, ticking away without bias or agenda. Yet history shows that even the clock can be political. The hours on a nation's watch face can carry statements of loyalty, independence, or defiance. Borders shift not only on maps of land, but also on maps of time, as governments decide what the official hour should be. The choice may sound trivial, but it can shape trade, diplomacy, and national identity in ways that reveal the subtle power hidden in time zones. Consider Spain, a country whose geography places it naturally in line with Britain. For centuries, local time matched the sun, with noon occurring when the sun was highest in the sky, much as in London. But in 1940, during the Second World War, Spain's dictator, Francisco Franco, moved the clocks forward by 1 hour to align with Nazi Germany. The decision was meant as a symbolic gesture of solidarity, even though Spain wasn't officially part of the war. Long after the conflict ended, the shift remained. Today, Spain continues to live on Central European time, which means that the sun rises and sets later than in neighboring countries. This is part of the reason Spanish meal times are famously late. Lunch in mid-afternoon and dinner at 9 or 10 in the evening are cultural habits that grew around a political decision about the clock. Elsewhere, the tug-of-war between identity and geography has produced equally striking cases. In 2015, North Korea moved its clocks back by 30 minutes to create its own Pyongyang Standard Time. The change was framed as a rejection of Japanese colonial rule, which had imposed Tokyo's time on the Korean peninsula during the occupation. By rolling the clocks back, North Korea symbolically rolled back history, carving out an identity separate from both Japan and South Korea. Yet only a few years later, in 2018, the country reversed the decision and rejoined South Korea's time zone as part of a gesture of reconciliation. The act demonstrated how mutable time can be in the hands of politics, a tool to divide or unite, depending on the moment. Trade often drives these choices as much as ideology. In 2011, Samoa made international headlines by skipping an entire day, leaping across the international date line to place itself on the same calendar as Australia and New Zealand, its major economic partners. For years, Samoa had aligned with the United States, but the growing importance of trade with the Pacific's western side made it inconvenient to be nearly a whole day behind. The shift meant that Friday, December 30th, 2011, simply didn't exist in Samoa. One evening, the nation went to bed, and when it woke, the calendar had jumped straight to Saturday. The change was practical, but it was also deeply symbolic, a small island nation choosing its future trading partners over its past alignments. Sometimes the disputes are more subtle, yet no less significant. Along borders, neighboring towns may observe different time zones, forcing residents to navigate a world of dual hours. In parts of the United States and Mexico, the line between Central Time and Mountain Time cuts through communities, meaning a short drive across a bridge can shift the clock by an hour. Families and businesses straddle these boundaries, adjusting schedules with a kind of practiced flexibility. The same happens in Europe, where Belgium, France, and the Netherlands once wrangled over whether to align with Greenwich or Central European Time. The decisions often reflected not only longitude, but also questions of political allegiance and regional identity. Colonial legacies still linger on the global clock. Many African nations, for instance, adopted time zones that aligned with the capitals of their colonial rulers rather than with local geography. West African countries such as Nigeria and Ghana are still set to align with Greenwich, reflecting British influence. Francophone nations often follow Central European time, echoing their historic ties to Paris. For these countries, time zones remain a reminder of a past in which their hours were decided by distant powers. Some have adjusted since independence, but many haven't, showing how sticky these inherited systems can be. Even within countries, time can become a battleground between central authority and local identity. In India, the Northeast has long complained that the official Indian Standard Time leaves the region's days unnaturally misaligned. The sun rises and sets far earlier there than in Delhi or Mumbai, leading to wasted daylight and disrupted schedules. Some activists argue for a separate time zone to better reflect local reality, but the government resists, preferring a single standard to preserve national unity. The debate illustrates how even the hour hand can become a symbol of political coherence. Russia, with its immense geography, has experimented repeatedly with its time system. At various points, it has reduced the number of time zones, then increased them again, reflecting shifting priorities of governance and efficiency. Decisions about whether regions should move an hour forward or back are often tied to Moscow's influence, demonstrating how time can reinforce the reach of central power across vast distances. In some cases, the arguments take on a humorous edge. Venezuela, under President Hugo Chavez, shifted its clocks back by half an hour in 2007, creating a unique offset of 412 hours behind Greenwich. The official explanation was that it would give children more daylight in the morning, but critics saw it as another attempt to assert national distinctiveness. Though the change may have puzzled international travelers, it reflected a consistent theme. Time is never just about efficiency, but also about identity. The persistence of these choices shows that time zones are more than technical conveniences. They're political statements, ways of aligning with allies or breaking away from rivals, of honoring history or rejecting it. A decision to shift the clock by 30 minutes or an hour may not seem dramatic, but it can ripple through society, altering work hours, trade flows, and even cultural habits. It's a reminder that time isn't only marked by the sun, but also molded by the ambitions of those in power. The debates continue today. In the European Union, discussions about abolishing daylight saving time have exposed divisions among member states. Some prefer to remain permanently in summertime, others in standard time, a choice reflecting not only latitude but also national preference. Across Asia and South America, similar arguments flare over whether to adopt daylight saving, adjust zones, or create new ones. Beneath the technical jargon lies the same tension: geography versus identity, efficiency versus symbolism. Time, in this sense, is one of the most quietly political aspects of human life. It orders our days and nights, frames our work and rest, and yet it's constantly shaped by forces beyond our control. The map of time zones is as much a political map as a geographic one, telling stories of empires, alliances, rebellions, and compromises. Every bend and curve on that map carries history. Every unusual offset tells of a choice once made. So the next time you hear that a country has shifted its clocks or adopted a new time zone, remember that it's rarely just about saving daylight or correcting an inconvenience. More often, it's about aligning with neighbors, asserting independence, or honoring history. Time may be invisible, but it's one of the clearest markers of how people choose to define themselves. The ticking of a clock can echo the pulse of politics, reminding us that even the hours of the day aren't beyond the reach of power. The map of time zones that now covers the globe may look like a permanent fixture, but it's in truth only a century and a half old. Like borders on land, it was drawn by human hands, not carved by nature. And just as political borders shift, there are voices today wondering if the lines of time should be redrawn or even erased entirely. The future of time zones is a subject of debate, with proposals ranging from abolishing them altogether to rethinking how societies adapt to daylight and darkness. Technology, already reshaping the way we live, may yet transform our very sense of hours. One of the boldest ideas is the concept of universal time. Instead of dividing the Earth into 24 zones, each with its own local clock, everyone would follow the same time everywhere. It might be 10 in London, 10 in New York, and 10 in Sydney all at once. Noon would no longer be tied to the sun overhead, but would be a purely numerical reference. Proponents argue that this would eliminate endless confusion in scheduling flights, meetings, and international calls. In a world of global trade and digital communication, where businesses span continents and workers collaborate across oceans, one universal clock could simplify everything. Yet such a system raises questions about how daily life would feel. If Sydney were on the same time as London, the sun might rise at what the clock calls 2 hours in the morning and set around 2 in the afternoon. People would still live by daylight, but their schedules would be wildly detached from the numbers on the dial. Lunch might be eaten at 5 in the evening, bedtime at 11 in the morning. While universal time could help computers and corporations, it might leave humans feeling estranged from their own hours. After all, the natural rhythm of sunrise and sunset has been our companion for millennia. Replacing it with pure abstraction could be efficient, but would it be livable? Another strand of debate focuses not on abolishing time zones, but on ending the twice-yearly ritual of changing the clocks. Daylight saving time introduced in the early 20th century as a way to make better use of summer evenings, has long been controversial. Some argue passionately for keeping the longer daylight of summer permanent, while others insist that standard time is healthier and more natural. Studies suggest that constant shifting disrupts sleep patterns and may even cause spikes in accidents and health problems after the spring transition. In response, governments around the world are beginning to reconsider whether the seasonal changes should end. The European Union has debated abolishing daylight saving, though agreement among member states on which system to adopt permanently has proved elusive. In the United States, proposals surface regularly in Congress to make daylight saving permanent nationwide, though so far without final success. Meanwhile, individual states and countries continue to tinker with the system, reflecting the fact that time isn't just about efficiency, but also about cultural preference. Do we value lighter evenings for leisure or brighter mornings for work and school? The answer often depends as much on geography and latitude as on politics. Technology complicates and enriches this conversation further. With the rise of digital connectivity, many people already live by multiple time zones at once. Remote workers schedule meetings with colleagues on different continents. Streaming platforms release shows according to global times, and stock markets operate in overlapping cycles. The Internet has created a sense of simultaneity, where events across the world are experienced together, regardless of local hours. For the digital generation, the boundaries of time zones may feel less rigid than they once did. A teenager in São Paulo and another in Seoul can chat in real time without much thought about whose clock reads what. At the same time, technology offers the possibility of tailoring time to the individual. Wearable devices track light exposure and sleep patterns, recommending schedules designed to align with personal circadian rhythms. Artificial lighting, already powerful, could be adjusted dynamically to mimic natural daylight, helping travelers or shift workers adapt to new schedules more smoothly. In such a world, the collective structure of time zones might matter less than the personalized experience of biological time. The hours could become something you carry with you, curated by algorithms rather than imposed by geography. Still, the enduring pull of the sun and the rotation of the Earth shouldn't be underestimated. For all the abstraction of atomic clocks and internet servers, people still wake more easily when light fills their windows, still feel drowsy when darkness settles in. The tension between universal time and local rhythm lies in this human truth. We are creatures of light as much as of numbers. Any future system must reconcile efficiency with biology, global needs with local realities. Looking ahead, it's possible that hybrid systems will emerge. Time zones may remain as broad markers, but technology will smooth over the friction at their edges. International flights and business may increasingly operate on coordinated universal time, already the standard for science, aviation, and space exploration. Meanwhile, daily life in towns and cities may continue to follow local rhythms, with work and school tied to the cycle of daylight. The world could, in effect, live on two clocks at once, one global, one local. There's also the symbolic side of time zones, which complicates any attempt at reform. Countries have long used time to assert independence, identity, or loyalty. Nepal's 15-minute offset, India's half-hour compromise, Spain's alignment with Central Europe, all are reminders that hours carry political weight. Proposals for universal time may make sense to engineers and economists, but they may collide with the cultural and symbolic meanings that communities attach to their clocks. A nation is unlikely to surrender its distinctive offset lightly. For time isn't only practical, but also personal. What seems certain is that the conversation will continue as the world grows ever more connected. The inconveniences of fragmented time will become more apparent, yet the diversity of human experience will resist any total homogenization. Just as languages persist in their variety despite globalization, so too may time zones remain stubbornly uneven, each one telling a story of geography, history, and identity. The future of time zones, then, may not be about erasing them, but about learning to live more fluidly with them. Technology already cushions the differences, translating times across calendars and apps at the touch of a button. For many, the problem of what time is it there has already faded, solved by the devices in their pockets. Perhaps the true future lies not in remaking the map of time, but in recognizing how easily we can now slip between its divisions. And yet the dream of one global clock continues to fascinate. It speaks to a yearning for unity, for a world in which the confusion of borders and zones dissolves into a single shared rhythm. Whether that dream will ever be realized remains uncertain. For now, the sun still rises and sets at its own pace, reminding us that time isn't ours alone to control. Whatever the future brings, the conversation about hours and zones will remain as much about humanity as about mathematics, about how we choose to live and how we choose to measure the days that carry us forward. There are places on Earth where the neat geometry of time zones unravels, where clocks disagree and daily life is shaped by the awkwardness of living between hours. These are the towns and regions perched on the edges of temporal borders, places where stepping across a street, a bridge, or a river can mean jumping forward or backward by an hour. For the people who live in such places, time isn't a fixed framework, but a flexible reality, negotiated every day with a mixture of practicality, patience, and sometimes humor. Border towns offer some of the most vivid examples. Take the twin cities of Ciudad Juarez in Mexico and El Paso in Texas. They're divided by the Rio Grande, but bound together by trade, families, and constant movement. For years, their clocks didn't always agree. Mexico's daylight saving rules differed from those of the United States, which meant that during certain weeks of the year, the two cities lived in different times. A morning commute across the border might throw someone an hour ahead or behind, depending on the season. Businesses, schools, and families all had to navigate this shifting landscape of hours. A daily reminder that time isn't only natural but also political. In Europe, the situation can be just as curious. Along the border between Spain and Portugal, two towns might sit just a few kilometers apart but live by different hours. Spain follows Central European time, while Portugal keeps to Greenwich Mean Time. For residents who cross back and forth regularly, the difference can play tricks. Lunch in one country may be dinner in the other, shops open and close at different hours, and a train crossing the border can appear to travel backwards in time. Yet people adapt. Locals know instinctively which clock to follow, depending on the errand, slipping between zones as easily as between languages. In some places, the divide runs through the middle of a single community. Barle, a town split between Belgium and the Netherlands, is famous for its patchwork borders, with houses straddling national lines. For years, the two halves of the town also operated in different time zones. Belgium aligned with Central European time and the Netherlands, following its own system before eventual standardization. Residents lived with dual clocks, setting appointments with the precision of diplomats. Even now, the memory of those overlapping times lingers, a testament to how communities can thrive despite such peculiar complications. The challenges aren't limited to borders between nations. Within countries, time can split communities in surprising ways. In Australia, the state of South Australia is half an hour behind the East Coast, while the neighboring Northern Territory shares the same offset. Cross the border on a road trip, and suddenly the clock in the car needs adjusting. For people living near the boundary, coordinating with friends and relatives on the other side becomes a matter of habit. Appointments are made with phrases like, "your time" or "mine," an everyday acknowledgement that hours aren't universal, but relative. Then there are places where local custom creates its own version of time. In the Pacific Islands, communities have sometimes kept to their own schedules, regardless of official clocks. The international date line itself twists and bends around island groups to keep nations whole. But even within those nations, life can follow rhythms set more by tradition than by time zones. The clock may say one thing, but fishing, farming, and festivals follow their own cadence. In such places, the official hour is only part of the story, coexisting with an older sense of time rooted in nature and community. Modern globalization has amplified these quirks. International airports often straddle the edges of time zones, becoming places where multiple clocks coexist. At some terminals, departure boards list times in both local and international standards, leaving passengers juggling conversions. Pilots and air traffic controllers solve the problem by using coordinated universal time, a single global standard. But travelers often find themselves caught in the in-between, unsure whether their watch should follow the city outside or the airline's announcements. For those who cross frequently, this liminal space becomes second nature, life lived between hours. The resilience of human adaptation in these places is striking. People develop a natural bilingualism of time, as fluent in the hours of one zone as in another. Children grow up knowing instinctively that when their school bus crosses a border, the time may change, but the rhythm of the day doesn't. Shopkeepers adjust opening hours to capture customers from both sides, sometimes keeping 2 clocks on the wall as a gesture of convenience. Families arrange meals and gatherings with a flexibility that would baffle those who live within a single, stable zone. This adaptation reveals a deeper truth about time. It's less rigid than we imagine. We like to think of hours as fixed and universal, but in practice, people bend them constantly to fit their needs. Border communities make this visible. They show that time isn't only something handed down from observatories and governments, but also something negotiated in kitchens, schools, and workplaces. In places where 2 hours collide, humanity proves that it can live comfortably in both. There's also a poetic quality to these in-between places. To stand on a bridge where one foot is in one time zone and the other in another is to feel the strangeness of time as a human invention. The sun doesn't care which side of the river you're on. It rises and sets regardless. But the clocks on either bank mark its passage differently, creating the illusion of 2 separate realities. These towns remind us that time is a shared story, one that can be written differently depending on who holds the pen. Thus, even as technology smooths over these differences, translating times automatically on phones and computers, the lived experience of being between hours remains unique. It's a reminder that time zones, for all their order, are ultimately lines drawn by humans. Where those lines meet, life becomes more complex but also more interesting. People adjust, adapt, and carry on, proving that human communities are far more flexible than the maps that try to contain them. The places where daily life defies neat divisions stand as quiet lessons in resilience. They show that time isn't absolute but adaptable, that ours can bend to fit the contours of geography and the needs of people. Whether in border towns juggling two official times, islands redefining their calendars, or households straddling multiple clocks, humanity thrives in the spaces where order meets improvisation. Living between hours may be complicated, but it's also a testament to our ability to navigate even the strangest quirks of the world's geography of time. Time may be invisible, but it's no less a border than the mountains and rivers that carve the earth. Just as landscapes divide and unite, so too do the hours. They flow across the planet, tracing lines that cannot be seen on the ground but are felt every time a clock chimes noon or a train departs on schedule. Time is geography's quietest frontier, a border that shapes human life as profoundly as any wall or shoreline. Think of the map of time zones as a kind of ghostly topography. Instead of ridges and valleys, it's made of hours and minutes. Each line is an agreement, a convention that places one side in today and the other in yesterday. These borders aren't drawn in stone, but in rhythm, yet they carry the same power to divide or unite. When you step across them, you don't feel a bump underfoot, but you may find your phone leaping forward by 60 minutes or your train ticket reminding you that the town across the river keeps a different clock. Time both fragments and binds the human world. It separates Spain from Portugal, Samoa from Hawaii, and yet it also knits them back together in a shared system. The very fact that differences exist only makes coordination possible. Without the map of time, airliners would wander, satellites would lose track of their positions, and international conversations would dissolve into chaos. Like a river, time divides banks, but also allows bridges to be built. Its currents pull us apart while giving us reason to find common ground. The geography of time also reveals how deeply human choices sculpt the seemingly natural world. The earth spins with unerring steadiness, but we are the ones who carve it into hours, deciding where to place the seams. Noon could just as easily have been defined by Paris or Washington as by Greenwich, and yet one observatory in London became the anchor for the global clock. Samoa could choose to erase a day from its calendar in order to join the time of Australia and New Zealand. Spain could choose to dine at 10 Mo in the evening because of a decision made in 1940. These choices show that time, far from being impartial, is full of history, politics, and meaning. There's also a poetic paradox at work. Time is universal. Every creature on Earth feels the turn of day into night, and yet time is also local, fractured into pockets of hours that belong to specific places. At the very moment one city is waking, another is sinking into slumber. Noon in New York is midnight in Shanghai. In this sense, time is both a common bond and an intimate divider. It's the most personal of geographies, shaping when we eat, when we sleep, when we work and dream, while simultaneously stitching billions of lives into a larger pattern. To see time as geography's invisible border is to recognize that it's not only a measure of passing days, but also a landscape of its own. The world map isn't complete with only mountains and seas. It also has these hidden lines of ours, winding and bending in ways just as fascinating as any river delta or mountain chain. Some of these borders are smooth, marching east and west in orderly strips. Others are jagged, contorted around nations and cultures, reflecting compromise and conflict. In their irregularity, they mirror the human story itself. Consider the strange beauty of the international date line, curving like a river through the Pacific, allowing islands to choose whether to belong to today or tomorrow. all the peculiar offsets of Nepal and Newfoundland, proof that a people can bend time to their own rhythm. These quirks aren't mistakes, but expressions of identity. Little reminders that even in the most abstract of human inventions, individuality flourishes. Time's geography is never uniform because humanity isn't uniform. The invisibility of these borders makes them even more intriguing. You can stand at the edge of a country and see a fence, a river, or a line on the pavement marking the divide. But step across a time zone boundary, and there's nothing to mark it, except the quiet shift of numbers on a screen or the feeling of being suddenly early or late. This intangible quality gives time zones a certain magic. They're borders you cannot touch, yet they govern your life more strictly than many you can. And yet, for all its divisions, time ultimately reminds us of unity. Every clock, no matter how it's set, ultimately reflects the same truth. The Earth is turning. Whether you live by Greenwich, Beijing, or Samoa's peculiar rhythm, your hours are drawn from the same cosmic cycle of light and dark. Beneath the human patchwork of zones and offsets lies the unchanging geography of the spinning globe. Time zones may fragment, but time itself unites. In the end, the geography of time is a story of human adaptation. We have taken the steady, impartial motion of the earth and woven it into a fabric that reflects our politics, our economies, our cultures, and our imaginations. We have bent hours around mountains, rivers, empires, and trade routes, creating a map as full of character as any atlas of land and sea. Time is both the simplest measure, the turning of a planet, and the most complex creation, a patchwork quilt of agreements that stretch across the world. As we approach the close of this journey, it's worth lingering on the thought that time, like geography itself, is both solid and fluid. It's as real as a mountain and as intangible as a breeze. It marks divisions as sharp as any border. Yet it also flows across them with ease. To understand time is to see another layer of the world's map, one that lies hidden in plain sight, guiding every train, every meal, and every heartbeat. The hours divide us, but they also connect us. They remind us that while we may live in different days, we all share the same turning earth. Time is geography's invisible border, delicate yet powerful, a map that shapes our lives in ways we often forget to notice. And in that realization lies a kind of calm wonder, a recognition that the world is stitched together not only by land and water, but also by hours flowing ceaselessly around the globe like an unseen tide. Time, in the end, is both the simplest thing in the world and one of the most mysterious. Everyone knows the feeling of a morning arriving, of an evening fading, of a year slipping quietly into the next. And yet, when you look closer, time turns out to be a mosaic of human invention, divided into zones, bent into half-hours, shaped by politics and trade, and synchronized by satellites and atomic clocks. It's universal, shared by every person on Earth, but also profoundly local, experienced differently in each community, each household, each moment. What makes time so fascinating is that it belongs to everyone and no one at once. A fisherman in Fiji, a nurse in Nairobi, a teacher in Toronto, all of them measure their days against the same turning planet. But each does so within a different rhythm. When it's dawn for one, it's dusk for another. The world is stitched together by these differences, and yet beneath them lies the steady heartbeat of the Earth's rotation. One full turn every 24 hours, as reliable as anything can be. The geography of time reminds us that humanity has always been both united and divided. Time zones are invisible borders, created not by rivers or mountains, but by agreements, compromises, and sometimes defiance. They tell stories of empires, of trade routes, of nations carving out identity. Spain eats late because of a political choice made decades ago. Nepal ticks to a 15-minute beat of its own to assert independence. Samoa once leapt forward across the international date line to stand with its trading partners. These choices reveal that even in something as abstract as ours, people express who they are and who they wish to be. And yet, for all the variety, there's still the sense of shared belonging. No matter which zone we live in, we all watch the sun climb and sink. We all feel the pull of dawn and the hush of twilight. Noon in New Delhi and midnight in New York may feel worlds apart, but they're part of the same rotation, the same universal sweep of light and shadow across the planet's surface. The diversity of time isn't a division, but a harmony, different notes of the same song. Patience lies at the core of this story. The Earth doesn't hurry. It has been turning steadily for billions of years, long before humans thought to mark seconds or divide days into hours. Our clocks may change, our calendars may shift, our politics may redraw the zones, but the planet itself is timeless in its rhythm. Watching a sunrise or feeling dusk settle is to connect with something that predates history and will outlast it. There's comfort in that constancy. At the same time, time zones remind us of connection across borders. A phone call to a friend on the other side of the world, a plane crossing the Pacific, a message delivered in an instant across continents, all depend on this delicate coordination of hours. Without shared time, global life would crumble into chaos. Instead, every hour of the day, humanity cooperates in this great, silent choreography. Billions of clocks ticking together to keep the world running smoothly. It's easy to forget, but in this invisible order lies a profound sense of unity. There's also something deeply calming about realizing how little control we truly have over time. We can bend it, adjust it, shift it by hours here or minutes there, but the turning of the earth goes on regardless. Days and nights will keep arriving whether we argue about daylight saving or debate universal time. That inevitability can feel like a burden, but it's also a relief. Time carries us forward gently but firmly, reminding us that tomorrow will always come. For those listening now, perhaps preparing for sleep, the geography of time offers its own kind of reassurance. The divisions we draw are human, temporary, and flexible, but the underlying rhythm is steady, eternal. The same sun that rose this morning will rise again. The same earth that spun today will spin tonight and tomorrow. Whatever the local hour, whatever the peculiarities of zones and offsets, there's always the quiet certainty that the world continues. It's humbling to think that every clock on Earth, no matter how precise, is just an echo of that one simple truth. The planet turns. From sundials carved in stone to atomic vibrations counted in laboratories, all our inventions are ways of keeping pace with that endless motion, and yet none of them are the thing itself. Time, in its essence, is the steady passage of day into night, night into day, flowing onward in a tide that no human can command. So let this thought carry you gently now. Time is universal, but it's also personal. It belongs to the whole planet, and it belongs to you, in the rhythm of your breath, the quiet beating of your heart, the sense of one day fading into the next. Across the world, others are rising as you rest. Others are working as you drift toward dreams. Others are watching stars emerge while you close your eyes. Different hours, different places, but all joined in the same circle of turning. The earth will keep turning, the sun will keep rising, and tomorrow will arrive quietly, steadily, as it always has. And with that thought, you can let the hours slip away, knowing that you are part of something vast, patient, and unbroken. Time isn't just a measure on a clock. It's the soft thread that ties together every life, every place, every dawn and dusk. Rest now within that rhythm, and let it carry you gently into sleep.